Hello, everyone. All right, we're going to give it about one more minute and then we'll get started here as the classroom fills up. If you get in here and you hear me, just give me a little nod in the chat room. Let me know that you hear me and that you see slide Alpha 05. Alpha 05 slide should be up on your screen. And if you can hear me, give me a nod. All right, I appreciate it. 5 by 5. All right. Okay. So I'm going to get started a little bit here. We got cut off a little early last. That's right, Ray. We're at A05. This is where we left off last week. We were talking about the SWR meter. I went and if you go to the PrepperNet site, I'm going to type it in. I uploaded all the videos so far that we've done and the PowerPoints. I've even done section 5. So I've actually put up things you haven't even seen yet. So that's out on the website now. I did that last night. So well, I had the admin do it. Sorry, I didn't. Takes a little bit of time to get it done, but we got it done. So I'm caught up to par with you guys. You have all your materials out there. So we're going to jump into it. We're in section 4. We're going into week 5. And so we really should be on section 5, but I'm hoping we can blast through 4. 5, towards the end of section 5, there's the same, that we get into some math, but don't be afraid. It's redundant, and I'm going to show you, you're just going to have a light bulb moment, and I don't think we're going to have to spend too much time on it. So my goal is at the end of this class, I'll bet that we don't get cut off by the system, by some system issue like we did last week, the last 30 minutes. Hopefully we can be a good part into 5 and be caught up for week 5. So let's go ahead and jump right into it, guys. I'm glad to have you here. Hey, Richard, Don, Keith, Ken, Leah, Dean, Eddie. Hey, Beth. So we're going to jump right into it. We're going to get rolling here. So last week we left off with what is the proper location for an SWR meter. So an SWR meter, it gives you an indication of how much power is being reflected back to your radio. Okay, a perfect match would be 1 by 1. 1.1 would be or 1 semicolon 1 is how it looks. That's a perfect match. It's great in a hypothetical world, but it's a white rhino to get to, if that's what a right term I could use is, a white rhinoceros, or in other words, it's radios are not going to blow up if you're 1 by 2, or 2 over 1 or something. Just 1 by 1 is a perfect match, meaning no power is being reflected back. Everything leaving your radio is going out the end of the antenna. And that's the perfect world you want, because the power that comes back to your radio comes back as heat. And of course, you don't want heat to come back, build up in your radio, and the term is fry your finals. That was the older style radios. These days, they've built, in the new modern radios, they've built safeguards that the radio will just cut off to protect itself. And then it'll attempt to cut back Okay, everybody, do you hear me now? Please tell me that you guys can hear me. Do you guys hear me? Please tell me you do. Oh, thank God. Okay, let's start all over again. All right, so question 5. Last week we talked about the external SWR meter. So the reason why they're talking about put it in series in the feed line, an SWR meter goes into your feed line, the transmission line, your coax, all the same thing. Screws into one end of the meter, and on the other side of the meter you have a little patch cable, the same coax, just with other connectors on it that go from the meter to your receiver, like in this right here. Okay. Now if we were to take this part out of the equation, okay, we just took this apart out of the equation, the antenna tuner, and you just ran your, imagine that it's not there. That's what they want you to see, okay? And obviously you don't want to see this patch cable doesn't apply right here, but you would have a short little patch cable, and then the rest of the cable will go out to your antenna. If you remember, the SWR meter just measures the amount of power that is being reflected back to your radio when you key up. When you key up, you're sending power out of your radio in the form of a signal. You want all that signal to leave the radio and not come back. You want it to go out down the coax, out the end of the antenna, and bye-bye. It's in the air, and somebody else is going to hear it when it catches their antenna. However, there is a certain amount of power that gets reflected back just by the very materials that are used to the resistance that exists in your coax line and in the antenna. An antenna that is perfectly matched is called a resonant antenna. I'm going to type that out. A resonant antenna. I've typed that into the chat room. That's a perfectly matched antenna. A perfectly matched antenna with coax and everything will give you a 1-to-1 ratio. All right. Most radios today are safe enough that it can go up to about a 1-to-3, even a 1-to-4, and it doesn't hurt the radio too much. Radios are pretty resilient these days. If you ever key up your radio and the radio cuts off, and when you unkey, the radio comes back on, and every time you do that, the radio cuts off, that is a telltale sign that your SWRs are too high. And the radio, what it's doing is it's shutting down to protect itself. Okay? So all you got to remember is just the SWR meter. It stands for, and I'm going to type that into chat, a standing wave ratio is what it stands for, SWR. Okay? Let's go ahead and move on to the next question. We got already some time to catch up here. So this box here is an antenna analyzer. I've got one myself. Usually on a 2-meter, when you 2-meter 440, most of the privileges that a technician would have, you typically don't have to worry about SWRs because the antennas that you normally would buy have already been pre-measured and pre-tested at the factory. But it's always a good policy when you put up an antenna to get somebody that has an antenna analyzer to be able to just give an initial test to tell you what the SWRs are. How do you find somebody that has one of these meters? Join your local radio club. They will help get your antenna put up. They will help you test it, and they will help teach you how to use your radio, the actual radio itself. Because chances are somebody in that club has your radio. Okay? So this box here, again, I have one. Because of all my radios and antennas, a lot of people have them. They run about $250. That's about how much it runs, but it gives you so much information in this box here. Okay, so again, it's always good no matter what radio you're using, CB, 2-meter, 440 HF, get that antenna and your setup initially tested just to make sure everything's okay. So everybody, we left off last week with this slide right here. If you go to PrepperNet.com, I'm going to type that out again, PrepperNet.com/tech. I have put all the PowerPoints and all the slides. I put everything up there to today. I've even put section 5 up there, and we haven't even gotten to it yet, the PowerPoint PDF for you. So I'm all caught up. I've got the admin to get it up there, so we're good to go up to this week. And this is where we left off last week when I checked the slides before we got cut off last week. So let's keep rolling here. Which of the following connections might be used between a voice transceiver and a computer for digital operations? Okay. And what they're asking you is, what are the, so you only need to have really 2 connections, right? You need to be able to hear and you need to be able to talk. Okay. And the only thing that really decides that in between those 2 functions is your push to talk button, your transmit button. Whether that's on the end of your mic, on the end of your Baofeng, wherever, but the button that you usually hold down to talk, that's your PTT button. Okay, so just remember that a large number of the digital modes can be encoded and decoded with a simple sound card and just a reasonable modern computer. So you don't have to read too much into this, but digital communications is really taken on in this day and age of cell phones and text messages and things. Digital communications talking has really taken on a life of its own. I can tell you that I probably do 80% of my communications are digital. So the only one that makes sense out of all these answers is C. You need to be able to listen, right? You need to be able to talk. And what's the one thing in between those that decides that? It's really the only one that makes any sense as far as a voice transceiver and a computer to talk on. And this is a good example of, he's got himself an ICOM 7200, that's the type of radio it is, and he's using his radio to talk. So I showed you this screen here on the right last week. I showed you this screen right here. I showed you what that looks like. This is what we call, this little part of the screen is called the waterfall. And every one of these little notches you see, those are signals. That's somebody talking digitally. And if you click on that, whatever the signal is will start coming across your screen if you match the mode up. Just because you see the signal doesn't necessarily mean that you have the software set to the mode. And what I mean by mode is there are many modes you can talk in. I don't want to get you too caught in the weeds, but you know, you've got CW, Morse code, you've got PSK31, Contestia 4250, which Amron uses a lot. We passed images, we passed pictures over ham radio using MFSK. You know, there's 16, there's 32, 64 of those, and that just means the speed in which we send it. We've got FSQ, JS8 call. We've got so many modes that we use. They're not really that hard. I know it sounds like it's confusing, and it's really not that hard. They're not that hard to learn. And Amron, personally myself, Amron's the place where I learned all of it. I didn't know any of it until I joined Amron, so what I know I've learned from them, and I can pretty much get around most obstacles to get my comms out. Over here on the right side on his screen, he just has a logbook, an electronic logbook of his contacts that he makes. So he just cut and paste from this screen over into the one on the right. Okay. So, and digital comms, you see, just nothing, doesn't look like anything big important here, right? He's got his radio over on the left-hand side. I can see a little tuner box on top, and right in front of it, I can see his little sound card interface for the radio. Okay. So it's not a huge, humongous setup. You know, this guy's using a desktop setup, but one laptop, a radio, and a sound card will do the trick. Not that hard. It's not that really difficult of a setup. So how's a computer sound card used when conducting digital communications? Well, think about your sound card. Everybody in this digital age and computer age has heard of a sound card, right? And the sound card is the device in your computer that is responsible for either hearing sound through a microphone or transmitting sound through your speakers, right? It's responsible for the audio. Okay. Well, we know that a sound card has nothing to do with video display. So these two answers are out of it, right? It's a sound card, not a video card. Okay, and because these two are wrong, D can't be right. All these are correct. So it's got to be C. Okay, and it says sound card, microphone. So in audio, microphone, the answer gives away so much there for you. And again, this is another setup. Okay, I can see the little tuner, that ATU that you saw in that diagram. That's this picture right here that I'm over. You need that question to be on the test. So I can see the tuner is here. A lot of these modern units, I can tell that's a Yaesu 450D. I can tell what model it is. A little geek moment there. That radio right there, you can buy brand new for, I think it was going for about $500. That sounds like a lot of money, but you know, considering I've got a $1,500 radio, that's pretty cheap. The sound card right here on the right hand side, it's what we call Signal Link. That's the brand, that's all, made by Tigertronics. It's probably the most popular sound card used. It runs about $80 to $100. About $80 with the specific cable to the radio. It's running about $20, so about $100. And all that does is it takes a cable goes to the computer and a cable goes to the radio. That's all it does. And then of course your tuner, all it does is just match. All right. So which of the following conductors provides the lowest impedance to RF signals? Okay. And what they're talking about is what they're really referring to is grounding. And this is what they're talking about, flat. The answer is a flat strap. And the best way to remember this, and hopefully my explanation will make sense for you to remember it is a good RF ground conductor uses a flat strap because a flat strap contains more surface area. Okay, and your signal, any kind of electrical charge, even your household wiring, it travels along the surface of the wire. Okay, so because it has the ground strap, you definitely want to have more area to it. You wouldn't want your transmission, your coax, which you're actually talking and listening through, to be flat, because that's more surface area that's going to eat up the power. Okay, and the reason why you want your ground straps to be flat is because, especially if you take a lightning hit or you take a surge, you want that strap to burn up before your radio does. So you want it to have as much surface area on it as possible to be able to absorb that energy. If the golden rule with surge and with lightning is it takes the path of least resistance. Okay. So again, these straps, they reduce the inductance. The conductor is the metal itself. Okay. The more strands, the better. That's right. And you can make one yourself. All it is, really, to be honest with you, a lot of people make their own ground straps. They have some old coax where the outer jacket has been exposed to weather and is cracked. So they and this is what coax looks like. You have your conductor, and usually you have foam or styrofoam or hard plastic dielectric as an insulator around that wire. Sometimes you'll have foil that's wrapped around the dielectric. Sometimes foil, sometimes not. You're almost always going to see a braid. Okay. and then your rubber jacket. And a lot of times people make their own ground straps. They strip away the outer jacket and they pull off this braid. They just pull it off from the end, and then they flatten it out and they put 2 eye loops on the end of them, and you got yourself a ground strap. Because when you think about it, look at that braid, right? And the picture is the same stuff, really. It's not, but that's a good. People do it. I'll just tell you that. If you were to take the ends off of this cable here, it's hollow in the middle. So just give you a little bit of a picture of, again, you can always make your own ground straps. Which of the following could you use to cure distorted audio caused by RF current on the shield of a microphone cable? So what you're doing is you're getting a cross interference from a signal that is leaking into your signal line of that's carrying your voice. And a ferrite choke is really easy. You've all seen these, right? Ferrite chokes are on about everything. These little knots, that's all they are. They're just clipped onto the radio, and if you open them up, this is what they look like. Yeah, MacGyverism. This right here, I can tell you cures a lot of problem. I've got a Ziploc bag full of these in my drawer. You could buy a dozen of them. They're probably not even $1 a piece. You know, the factories buy them by the thousands, if not the millions, so they're paying pennies. But you yourself, you can buy them from eBay, Amazon. They're less than $1 a piece. And you just simply run your cable through it and around it and back out it. And what that does is it adds inductance to the line, so it cancels out the what we call common mode RF energy, radio frequency energy. Okay, and in ham radio, you'll learn, especially if you get up into HF radio, you put these on everything. You'll become a big fan of ferrite cables. I have them all through my house. If they didn't come on the power cable when I bought the equipment, the TV, the whatever, that I see them. Now, I will tell you, there's what we call wall wart. I should have put a picture in here. There's what we call wall warts, and I'm gonna type that out in. I'm going to type it out in the chat. We call it a wall wart. And what a wall wart is just a power adapter. You've seen them. You know, you buy a cordless telephone, and it comes with a separate adapter. And it's this big knot of plastic with the prongs that go into the wall, and then this real thin wire that comes out to a jack that plugs into the back of the base. Those are wall warts. And I can tell you that those are your worst culprit for interference, because they're so cheaply made. It's the last thing that whoever you buy buy whatever from that uses them, that's the last thing they're thinking about. If it brings power to the equipment that you're buying, that's really all the manufacturer cares about. The interference you create, that's your problem. So those are notorious for it, just to let you know. How long can you make a ground strap to be effective? So ground straps, you want them to be as short as you possibly can make them. Typically, you just want to make them a straight line, straight to what a lot of people do is they'll take copper pipe and they will bolt it to the wall, and they'll just put hose clamp. They'll take the straps and just hose clamp them all to that pipe. And then on the end of the pipe, they'll take like 4-gauge wire, just bare copper wire, and they'll run it out through their window and go down to a ground rod outside their window. Real simple stuff. But how long does the ground strap need to be effective? Again, path of least resistance, just as short as possible. Sometimes you don't get things in your favor. Sometimes you might have to make a ground strip 6-8 feet long. I hope you don't. But if that's the best you can do, absolutely best you can do, then it's better than having no ground strap at all. So, What is the source of a high-pitched whine that varies in engine speed in a mobile transceiver's receive alternate audio? Now, some of us old dogs in here, you remember back in the Van Halen days, right? You remember back when you used to go to the skating ring and sit out in the parking lot and we'll just say talk to your friends. I'll leave it at that. Everybody used to. You remember back in the day before, you know, when the tape deck was an option, you had to have to pay extra for the tape deck. You remember that? So people would go out and buy the Kenwood deck and they would put it into their car. What was the one problem you always had? And that was, you know, you had the cheap car in the family, so you go step on the gas and you hear the whine in the speakers. Everybody's been there, right? If you're a kid of the 70s, you know you know the struggle. So, and you always knew what was the one thing you had to do. You had to change your plug wires, right? So the alternator in your vehicle it's an alternate current generator. It generates alternate current. Okay? So more often than not, it's responsible for creating a lot of interference. And, you know, back in those days, all you had to do was just put a little noise suppressor in line with the power, and it just cleaned up the power coming into the radio, and cured your problem. Okay, so the question here was, you know, what is the source of it? It's the alternator. Okay. You know, it was not, if you remember those times, the fuel pump, an electric fuel pump doesn't have anything to do with it, because in a fuel pump in a car, it's a constant. Okay, and they're saying high-pitched whine that varies. Well, as long as the car's running, doesn't the fuel pump have to keep going, right? It would be a constant whine then. Anti-lock braking system, well, that would be only when you put on the brakes, right? So, and if the car's running, once the car's running, the ignition system kind of is out of the loop. So really the only answer here really makes sense is the alternator. Where should the negative return connection of a mobile transceiver's power cable be connected? Okay. I hear this a lot, and a lot of people will say, just use your cigarette lighter. Cut off, you know, take your power leads to your radio, solder them to a cigarette lighter connector, and just plug in your cigarette lighter. Here's the problem. Not all cigarette lighters put out 12 volts. Your newer cars, the cigarette lighter doesn't put out hardly any voltage. So you're going to run into a problem. So, you know, just like all the other electrical in your car, it either comes into the common ground of the battery or it comes into a common ground against the engine block. And usually somewhere on the side near the valve cover, you'll see one of these flat bare straps that we were talking about that's bolted to the block. Okay? And that's what they're talking about here. So, you know, and one thing I will tell you is that don't just take the wire, the ground wire, and just find a metal part in your underneath your dash and screw it to it. Don't do that, because the ends of that metal bar may be connected to plastic. So it's not going to make a good ground. Any questions? So what may happen if a transmitter is operated with the microphone gain set too high? So think about when you went to a rock concert, you know, and a guy was on stage and he's screaming into the mic and this PA system is just blaring, right? You remember that? You ever been to a rock concert or, you know, with loud music, when the PA system is already just raring, full blast, you don't hear who's talking. It just sounds distorted, right? How many of you ever been to a concert and had to look at the guy next to you and say, what the heck did he just say? You know, and the guy was like, how you doing, North Carolina? Good to see you tonight. And all you heard was wah, 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 right? So the output signal may become distorted. You had no hearing for a day. And you couldn't talk either, remember? Like it sounded, people could see your lips moving, but didn't hear anything come out because there was no voice left. Yeah. Remember those days, right? So some microphones do have an adjustable gain control. When we talk about gain in radios, we're talking about that that signal, that RF, the power that is coming out as a signal. You can turn that power down. Not so much turn the power to the radio down, but just turn the output power that's coming out of that microphone, and you can turn that down. So some radios have an internal gain control that you can trim it. You can turn it down a little bit on the microphone. Yeah, well, overmodulation is really the term, I guess, would be the opportune term, is just overmodulated, right? Just way so distorted. You know there's a signal there, but it just makes no sense. So one of the things that you can do is, you remember what I was telling you when you're talking on your microphone? A good word, if you got the Baofeng in your hand or a microphone is a fist distance away from your mouth. Keep the microphone. Look at what this lady's doing here. She's got it a good 12 inches from her mouth, probably. Okay. This girl right here looks like she's a little bit closer, but she could put her fist there and be able to hear. I mean, and not overmodulate. Okay. So this is good practice here. The problem that we all have is when we're talking to something we can't see in the room next with us, we tend to want to holler and want to raise our voice levels. You know, these microphones on these radios are pretty sensitive these days. You can talk into those just like you would. Just because you see the little pinhole that's a microphone, you know, and it's just a little pinhole, doesn't mean it's not be able to pick up, you know, sound vibrations. So you want to be able to, again, hold your fist away from your face and be able to talk into a normal inside voice into the radio. 4 inches is fine. That's right. About your fist, right? A grown man's fist, a good 4 or 5 inches. Well, 5 inches for some of you. Some of you got meat hooks on you, but that's just a good practice. And some people hold it off to the side of their mouth. That works very well. When you're talking and you hold the microphone to the side, then the brunt of your sound, the energy coming off of your voice, isn't hitting that microphone as hard. Okay? And that's a good practice too. The problem is when you turn it sideways, you pick up a lot more of the surrounding noise too. Okay? So which of the following can be used to enter the operating frequency on a modern transceiver? You know, I always tell people, go for your general, because general is getting the test is one thing, but once you have the license, the privileges is pretty easy. You want to know why? Because you don't worry about repeaters and offsets and all that stuff. Okay, you just worry about the big fat knob on the face of the radio. If you turn that sucker, you'll tune the radio, and almost every radio has a big fat knob. The biggest knob on it is almost always going to be the VFO. VFO stands for Variable Frequency Oscillator. Okay. So Victoria, you just have to reconnect. If I was getting across a bunch of people, like I did last time, then I would know it would be me. So. But just to let you know, this radio on the left here, we call Cadillac of radios. An L-Craft is a Cadillac of a radio. These radios that you're looking on the left here, this radio can cost you easily $3,000 to $4,000, $4,000 for this radio on the left. The radio on the right you can pick up for about $1,000. They look the same, right? Well, they're not. This is a radio. I call this my retirement radio. When I retire, instead of the gold watch, I want the L-Craft. So, but again, big fat knob is the VFO knob, right? Now, on UHF, VHF, the VFO knob, a lot of times it bleeds right in. Now, on this ICOM here, there's a big knob here, right? But on handhelds like your Baofeng, the only way that you can tell which one is the tuning knob is because usually the tuning knob will click as you're turning it. The volume knob is a smooth operation. Usually your tuner, your VFO, is going to have a clicking action to it. So, and almost all the radios these days have a keypad either on the microphone or they have it on the faceplate of the radio, the handheld, that you can directly enter in the frequency that you want. Okay? Whoops. What is the purpose of the squelch control on a transceiver? So what a squelch does is it closes up the circuit a little bit so that, and it sets a threshold. And noise coming into the radio has to exceed that threshold for it to break the squelch and open up the receive function on the radio. Okay? So again, the squelch's job is to squelch or mute the noise when there's no signal. If you didn't do that, it would just be a constant white noise, right? So you turn it just to when you stop hearing that noise. And when you stop hearing that noise, then you're at a sweet spot. If you turn it up too high, then you're moving that threshold, that the gate or the door, whatever you want to call it, you're moving that threshold up too high, and somebody, an incoming signal from a repeater or from a simplex channel coming in to your radio isn't going to be loud enough or strong enough to break through that threshold, to exceed that threshold. So you just want to turn it to where you get a silent radio and stop. On a lot of your handhelds, like your Baofengs, you're not going to have a squelch setting. It's usually going to be a squelch is usually an issue that you see in CBs and HF radios. VHF and UHF radios, your Baofengs, typically don't have a problem with the squelch. It's a menu setting. And usually if you go into the menus, you'll see a column that'll say squelch. And it's usually just a number. I think on the Baofengs like 1 through 5. Okay. And a good number to set that to, a lot of people set it to 2 or 3 for a Baofeng. Right about the middle, I guess. So what is a way to enable quick access to a favorite frequency on your transceiver? Well, when you look at all these, memory channel seems to be the only one that makes sense, right? If you just take a moment and you read these, enabled tones or disabled tones has nothing to do with accessing your favorite frequency. Okay? You remember we talked about those. The tone is like a key that goes in the door and opens up a repeater or opens up a receiver. So, and use the scan mode to select the desired frequency. When you use the scan mode, it's going to go through every frequency that you have in your channels. It's just going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. It's just going to keep going through them. And when it reaches the max memory channel, it goes back to 1 and starts all over again. It does it very fast until a signal breaks the squelch threshold, and then it'll stop at that channel and let you hear. So the ability of most radios to store and program frequencies is fairly easy now. There is a program out there called Chirp. You just Google it. I typed it into the chat. Chirp is it's free. And Chirp, probably you can use Chirp, the one program Chirp, you can use the program there's probably a few hundred model radios that it will program, and that's no lie. It'll do all the Baofengs. It will do I have a really nice expensive Kenwood, and Chirp will program it. It doesn't program all radios, but it will program a lot of them. You just have to set it in the menu. What USB port you want it to listen to in the menus of Chirp, and and you can usually find that COM port in your device manager of your computer. So again, so if you wanted to reach a repeater and you needed the correct frequency you had to input the offset and the tone every time you wanted to get to a repeater. That just sounds really exhausting, right? When you could put all that into a channel setting, commit that to memory, and it's already done for you. So when you click to that channel, all the settings get changed to that channel setting. So the keywords here are frequency, which is found in the question and the answer. Remember, I told you a lot of times you'll see that. Okay. Now the problem here is also D has frequency in it too. But again, memory channel, quick access to your favorite. That's in everything, right? Your car stereo has memory channels. Why do you have it? Why do you have those there, right? Which of the following would reduce ignition interference to a receiver? So that's right, Dean. You just got a radio. You got the radio I recommended too, that UV82 high power. Great radio. You did a good job, man. Congrats. You programmed your radio. I caught wind of that. It got to me. Great job, man. Awesome job. You don't realize how many people have trouble programming radios, and I tell them in your testament that if you just really think about it, it may come a little bit difficult at first, but you catch on really quick, and it's really easy, real easy. Once you do it once, it goes a lot easier. So back to the test. To the question. So which of the following would reduce ignition interference as a noise blanker? So what a noise blanker does is it's designed to filter out interference. Okay, so what it does is it takes when you have a frequency set on your radio, it takes the sweet spot of that frequency and just moves it very slightly. As you turn that noise blanker, it's usually a dial, and it just gently just moves it so minorly, but it's just enough that it moves that interference off the center of the frequency so that it becomes less and less domineering in your receive signal. It moves it so that that interference becomes off to the side of your signal instead of right in the middle, blocking everything that you want to hear. Okay, so again, you go back to into the replay and watch all these and really get into the question. Get into the answers as I've written them out. So increasing the squelch setting might help you ignore some of the problem. If the noise is slight, you remember that threshold. If you move that threshold up just a little bit, sometimes the interference, if it's weak, sometimes you can move your threshold, the receive threshold up a little bit, just past where that frequency is or where that interference is. It doesn't work all the time, but sometimes it can. We're going to take a break here in about 9 minutes. We'll take one at top of the hour. So, which of the following controls could be used if the voice pitch of a single sideband signal seems too high or low? Okay, so a lot of these questions, the noise blanker, you're going to find that on an HF unit, but they want you to know what these are now. Okay, some of your handhelds and some of your nice VHF, UHF, your Kenwoods, your Yaesus, your Icoms, they have some of these have that setting in them. It's not always, but sometimes they do. I will tell you that your Baofeng is going to be on the lower end of the features spectrum. You're paying $30. Dean, you probably paid $50, $55 for yours, one of the nicer Baofengs, but it's not a feature-rich radio, so you may not have a noise blanker. You may not have a RIT or a clarifier. So what a RIT does is it stands for Receiver Incremental Tuning, and it's a fine-tuning control. Okay, and it actually changes the frequency. The noise blanker does not change the frequency at all. It just moves the center of the frequency. It moves the emphasis of that signal just slightly left or right of center to reduce interference. Whereas a RIT, it actually will change your tuning. So if you're 146.52, you could be .520. The RIT control might help you go 146.522 and help you actually move the tuning a little bit. And RIT really helps when you have radios that are slightly off. They've been jostled, they've been knocked around a little bit. They need to be tuned up a little. The RIT can help with that. RIT really helps a lot though in single sideband communications. Remember we talked about that carrier signal, and then on each side of the carrier signal you have a sideband. Okay. And those sidebands, if you have a lower and an upper sideband together with the center frequency, you get more of a fuller sound. If you only have one of the sidebands, the sound is thinner. It doesn't. I won't say it's stereo, but it's just thinner. But the good thing about a sideband signal is it's a much more narrower signal. It's able to get out farther and still be legible on the other end. A farther distance away. So, and the thing about the RIT adjustment, a lot of times what it will do is as you move the frequency just slightly, we're not talking about, again, 146.52 is simplex. We're not talking about .53, .54. We're talking minute, very small increments that is being moved. It will cause the pitch of the voices that you hear to change a little bit. They'll either lower or they're heightened because you're moving a little bit away from that sweet spot of that signal. If that makes sense. Okay. So if you hear a signal and it sounds really high pitched, you can use a RIT or a clarifier to kind of bring that pitch of that voice down to where it sounds normal. What does the term RIT mean? Just receiver incremental tuning. So a lot of these questions you get, I want to give you guys advice, and we're going to take a break here in a couple minutes. I want to take 2 seconds to give you a really quick testing tip. When you're taking your test and you hit a question that you don't understand, just keep going. When you're taking a test, you've got 35 questions. Go through it and answer the ones that you feel good about. You feel solid about it. You don't have a doubt about the answer. You feel really good about it. Okay? And then when you hit one that you have a little difficulty, you're just not sure, move on. The reason why is, and that's sage advice to give you, is you don't want, when you're taking a test, for the clouds to come moving in. What follows clouds? Storms. You don't want a storm going on in your head while you're taking a test, right? Keep the skies clear. If you hit a trouble spot, jump over it and move on. It's a paper test. It's not a computer test. You can go back. Once you've done all 35, you want to go back and make sure that you didn't miss any. You know, I would suggest that you make a little tick mark over the number on your answer sheet. And then when you're done, go and look for any of those tick marks so you know to go back and look. You're going to see it's a bubble sheet. We've all taken tests where you use the bubble sheet to, circle in your answer. It's the same thing. That's what you're going to be using. Okay. And the reason why I say that now is to tell you is it's totally possible that you could get this question and then you could get this question. What else if you got stuck on this one and you spent so much time with it that now you get a little frustrated and you get to this one and your mind is clouded, when this one may have helped you answer this one, right? So just word of advice is don't let the clouds move in. Keep the skies clear and sunny and just keep rolling. And then go back, because a lot of times you may have a problem with question 2, and question 34 will help you answer question 2. Yeah, it has happened. I can't tell you how many times people have told me that after I told them this, they'll come back and say, your advice was right. You're absolutely right. I remember number 32 helped me answer number 5, and I had a problem with number 5. Okay, so just remember that this is a perfect example where one literally gives you the answer, helps you answer the other in a way. All right. So if you know if you knew that we're right here, receiver incremental tuning, you weren't sure how to answer this one. Well, it says if the voice pitch of it seems too high or low, well, it sounds like to me you might want to tune it just a little bit, right? Incrementally tune your receiver. So moving on. 2 more minutes, we'll take a break here. What is the advantage of having multiple receive bandwidth choices on a multi-mode transceiver? Okay. You read through these, they give you a lot more wording that is absolutely necessary. I'm going to dumb it down to you and tell you that sometimes some modes work better than others, whether it's storm conditions, whether or not it's interference, whether or not because some modes don't use as much bandwidth as others. You might find one bandwidth that has a lot of one mode that has interference on it. You switch to another mode on the same frequency, you switch to a different mode, and now you don't have that interference. Why? Because the mode that you switch to doesn't use nearly the bandwidth, and now the part of the bandwidth that had the interference is no longer there because you're now using a different mode, a much more narrower bandwidth. So having choices helps you reduce noise and interference. Okay. So different modes use different amounts of bandwidth. If you're using a narrow receive bandwidth and the mode is FM, you're only going to hear a portion of the signal. On the other hand, if you're using a wide FM receive bandwidth and the mode is narrow FM, you may not be able to make out the signal at all. So, and when you go into chirp, there will be a setting over there where it will say in FM or FM. Okay. And that's where they're talking about narrow FM or FM. Okay. Don't get hung up on this too much. Don't worry. This isn't going to be an enormous deal breaker for you when it comes to radio. All right. Let's take a break for a second. Let's take about a 5-minute break, and we'll come back to this question here. I'm going to stick around. Those of you got questions that we've covered here, I'm going pretty fast, trying to make up for that little drop there. So I'm going to stick around here while you take a break. Anybody got any questions, hit me up. Let's see what you got. I'm going to eat one of my kids' Tootsie Rolls. Tootsie Roll! Tootsie Roll! Oh, it's bad. When I'm 47, I listen to my kids' music. All right. No questions. All right. You guys are hearing the package of a Tootsie Roll being opened. Is it just me, or when you look at a Tootsie Roll, does something else come to mind? Maybe I just need to stop saying it. Okay. Dean, okay, so you hear me. Does Baofeng work inside or just outside? Kathy, Baofengs will work anywhere. It's not the radio, the brand, or how much you paid for it. A lot of people will give you a lot of hate about a Baofeng. I'm of the nature of use what you can afford, but just understand that you get what you paid for. Don't go out and buy a Ford Focus and try to haul lumber with it. Yeah, right? So if you buy a Baofeng, don't expect to, if you're in North Carolina, to talk to Kentucky on it. It doesn't work that way. But To answer your question, does a Baofeng work indoor or outdoor? It's not about the radio. It's about the signal. I would say VHF and UHF play more of an important role in indoor or outdoor. When you're indoors trying to talk out, I would say UHF works better. Why? Because the bandwidth is narrower. It will get through doors and windows easier than a VHF signal. VHF does not work very good once you get in. I don't say it doesn't work very good, but you tend to run into interference problems and block signals with VHF than you are UHF. Your fire departments, their handheld radios, a lot of those radios are UHF because they have to be able to communicate from within the bowels of a building that's on fire, right? So, yeah, and it looks like Eddie's answering it for me. You know, when you're outdoors, the greatest factor that comes into play is obstructions out, trees, hills, buildings. Those are going to play into it the biggest part. You know, if I was in downtown Charlotte and I had my, you know, the reality is that aside from my signal bouncing off the faces of the building to get out of the downtown area, the only luck I'm going to have really of getting out of downtown is to use one of the repeaters that are on one of the rooftops of the tall buildings in downtown Charlotte. But if I'm in the middle of downtown Charlotte and I have my Baofeng in my hand and I expect to talk to a repeater that is 5 miles away outside of downtown Charlotte, I might experience some issues unless my signal bounces off the face of a building to hit that repeater. But then all of a sudden when I get home, I find that my Baofeng will talk to a repeater that's 10 miles away. Well, the reason might be is because maybe your house is at an elevation that is at somewhat of a peak around the surrounding area around you. You might be at one of the higher elevations than your surrounding area. And there may not be anything between you and that repeater blocking the signal. So I'm going to go back. But you mentioned how you didn't have a radio installed in your car. Do you have a handheld with an antenna hard? Yeah. So Eddie, I keep an antenna in my trunk that I can take out and I can stick on the hood. The problem that I have found is that the magnetic mounts, they, you know, you figure you're going down the highway doing, you know, well, I go down the highway doing 80 miles an hour. It's the only way I know how to travel. 80 miles an hour to an antenna that's on a mag mount, you've seen where it'll move that mag mount. It can move it just so slightly. I just don't want a bunch of scratches on my paint job because of a mag mount. The other types that screw to the lip of your trunk lid, things like that, the problem with that is wind, when it bends over the antenna, a lot of times it can warp the edges of your trunk lids, your doors, things like that. I know you working on cars, you probably are very well aware of this. So I do keep a mag mount in my car, but most of the time, so I have my radio is called I'm going to type it out for you if you want to. You're always welcome to go look. This is the type of radio that I carry. It's called a THF6A. It's a tri-band radio. Mine has 220 megahertz, 145 megahertz, and 440 megahertz on it. But Kenwood makes a really good antenna for theirs. Baofeng, it's just a plastic little stick that comes in the box. And I always suggest people replace those with a what we call a Nagoya. So Dean's radio, I would replace it with a Nagoya 701 or a 771. The difference is that the 701 is 7 inches long, and the 771 is 14 inches long. The 14-inch one works really good, but who wants a 14-inch antenna sticking off of the radio? It really is a pain in the ass when you're walking around and stuff like that. But it is a better antenna. So to answer your question, I don't remember the model of it, but I have a Diamond. I went out and bought another antenna. It was made by Diamond for my Kenwood handheld, and it was about $60 for the antenna. I've had the radio for about 3-4 years, and just decided to get another antenna for it. I really didn't need it. I just wanted it. So so do you use a handheld with an antenna hard installed? Now, to answer your question, Eddie, a lot of times people will take a mag mount and they'll stick it on their car, and they will get the right kind of little adapters to match the end of the radio. You are certainly welcome to undo the little what we call the rubber duck antenna on the end of a Baofeng. You are certainly welcome to undo that and screw in the Baofengs have a connection on them called an SMA female. So you would have to get an antenna that has an SMA male end. Yeah, and you can undo that 771 and screw in the mag mount if you want and talk with your Baofeng. That's perfectly fine, and you will notice a world of difference between the antennas. The reason why is, and a lot of people don't realize this, is that Eddie can attest to this. A lot of your current cars have what we call cavitated glass. Cavitated glass is solar energy glass. It has very minute metal particles in the glass that help reflect the heat away from the car. And you go out and buy a car, it looks just, you go jump in your 2018 Tacoma, and you're looking out the windows, it looks just as clear as jumping in your 71 Dodge Ram. But there is a very minute, the tempered glass, they coat it, that's right. And you can't really see it with your eyes, but that type of glass can play tricks on a radio when you're using a rubber ducky inside of your car. So, like I traded in a Kia Optima that had it was a SXL turbo, so it had the all glass roof to it. I was screwed. I didn't have a metal roof to put a mag mount on. My lid was aluminum, so nothing stuck to it. The whole dang car all the way around was cavitated glass. So a beautiful car, gorgeous car, but I had the hardest time with a handheld radio. I had to literally let the pull back the sunroof, open it up, and let my antenna stick a little bit out the top of it. Yeah, it signal blocked a lot of it. So having a mag mount in your car as part of your go bag is always a great thing to have, because the mag mount, when you stick it to your car, the car becomes part of the antenna. It's what we call it serves as a ground plane. Okay, every signal has to have it needs to have a ground plane to it, a positive and a negative signal. Positive and a negative component to the signal. when you have a mag mount, the card itself serves as that negative component, and it strengthens the signal quite a bit. So it's always good to have that mag mount with the right kind of connector for a Baofeng, just stuffed in your trunk for those times when you need it the most. Okay, everybody, let's get back, jump into this. Everybody's had enough time to drain the bladders and get something to drink, throw down a 6-pack, do whatever you do. You do you, and we're going to keep rolling here. So, which of the following is an appropriate receive filter bandwidth for minimizing noise and interference for single sideband reception? Now, I know some of you probably have already been scratching your head 5 questions ago. I'm going to tell you that some of these questions you're not really meant to fully grasp the answer. Okay, the best thing you can do for some of these is memorize it. You probably, for some of you, you're probably saying that applies to all of this, Natty. I understand. Understand that you are taking a test for something you haven't done yet. You're taking the test so that you can do it. So don't beat yourself up. Don't overanalyze it. Just roll with it, and the ones that you can understand and wrap your head around, those are the ones on the test you want to tick and move on, tick, move on. Okay? A lot of times you just find a keyword into the question. A lot of times you can match it to a keyword or a group of words in the answer, and both of them together, when you look at the other answers compared, it's the only one that can make sense. You know? And I can tell you that being an extra ham radio operator, I'm no smarter than any of the rest of you. I really am not. I passed that test honestly by grouping questions with answers and coming up with stupid mnemonics that would help me memorize it. Okay. So Richard Lynn, does ground strap just go to the radio? Yeah, it goes to all the components. So yes, the main component that you want it to go to is your radio. I wouldn't worry so much about your power supply. I really wouldn't, because your power supply plugged into the wall has a ground there, right? Because the whole house is on a ground. If you have it plugged in, the radio's not on the ground. The way your radio gets fried is the signal that hits the antenna and comes up through that coax line. So the only thing you really need a ground strap is on the radio. If you have an antenna tuner, you want one on it as well, because there's no electrical component to it. It just has coax running it. So which of the following, again, is the appropriate receiver filter bandwidth for minimizing noise and interference? It's 2400 hertz. So the information contained in the average human voice needed to understand the voice. The average human voice needed to understand the voice is contained within about the first 3,000 hertz of human hearing range. So just remember that the normal human voice and all the frequencies that your voice can emit, the human ear can only intelligibly disseminate the first 3,000 hertz of that signal, of that frequency of the human voice. Okay. CM, well, CM, don't sweat it. I promise you, don't sweat it. The only difference between me and you is that when you take that technician, look, we got a guy in here that works on Tesla automobiles. A Tesla automobile is a power plant on wheels. There's no other way to describe it. The complexity in a Tesla automobile is mind-boggling. Okay. And here I am, an extra, teaching him, and I couldn't begin to tell you about what goes into a Tesla automobile. And this guy can rip one apart and put it back together. So it has nothing to do with our intelligence of one being smarter than the other. All it is privileges. That's all it is. Just privileges. Just privileges. So Because of this, again, the answer is the only one to 2400 hertz. So if you can remember 3000 hertz or 3 kilohertz is what is the typical range of the human voice. Anything beyond that, you start skipping out of another person's ear being able to legibly hear it. And I guess to say once you get above 300 hertz or 3000 hertz, dogs start hearing it. Does that make sense to you? Dogs start turning their heads sideways and wondering where the sound's coming from. Which of the following is an appropriate receive filter bandwidth for minimizing noise and interference for CW reception? The key here is to understand this. In this question here, CW is what? Is Morse code, right? Morse code takes the least amount of bandwidth because all it is dits and das, right? There's hardly any bandwidth to that at all. So in this answer here, it would be the lowest number. It has the lowest bandwidth of any signal in amateur radio, so it will require the lowest filter to minimize noise and interference for it. So if you can just remember that CW is Morse code, and Morse code is the most narrow of all communications, and that's why Morse code wins the day. At the end of the day, nothing will ever beat Morse code. It has stood the test of time for a long time, since before World War II. I mean, we were using Morse code in the Cowboys and Indian days. Okay. So just remember that being the bandwidth, being the narrowest, you just use the smallest number there. Okay. What is the function of automatic gain control? Okay. So automatic gain control is used to control the gain, obviously, gain control, so that when AM signals get stronger, they don't suddenly get louder. Carrington event and the Marines were referred to radio signals as FM frickin' magic. Too funny. So what automatic gain control does is that some signals, when, especially in HF radio, you see it a lot. Somebody that I'm talking to, now this isn't always true. I could have, this happens all the time in Amron. The guy up the road in Greensboro, we're trying to check into a national net, and I can't hear the guy in Greensboro. I can't hear the guy in Richmond, Virginia, but I can hear the guy in Toledo, Ohio, or the one in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, or Oklahoma City. And sometimes one signal will come in so much stronger and louder, like the guy sitting right in the room with me. What automatic gain control does is it levels those out, okay? And it smooths out the changes in that audio signal. And that's really all it means, just gain control, and it automatically does it, okay? And you have slow, you have medium. It usually goes slow, medium, and fast. That's usually the settings for it, slow, medium, and fast. And it's how fast does it pick up on it. And I will tell you that as a technician in 2 meter, a lot of times you don't have to worry about automatic gain control. A lot of like the Baofangs have a setting already in them. It's automatic. I mean, you literally don't have to set it to anything. So. And I go through and I explain the other answers and why they can't be the right answer. I'm not going to go in it word for word. It'd be kind of insulting to tell it when you can see it yourself, okay? So which of the following can be used to remove power line noise or engine noise? Okay? So a noise blanker. You remember we were talking about noise blanker a while ago, right? So a noise blanker, what it will really do is, like it says here, reduces the impulse noise without significantly reducing the strength of non-impulse noise. So we always the slang that we use in radio is it just tames undesirable signals. Okay, and it takes a signal that is really strong and undesirable, maybe a tap 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 tap, and it takes it from going tap 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 to tap 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 tap, so that I can actually hear the voice. I don't hear the tap over the voice. I can move the voice to the side just a little bit, I'm not tuning it. I'm not changing the tuning. I'm just changing the center just a little bit to now where the voice is stronger than the tapping is. That's all. So we've already talked about a notch filter, right? I believe we talked about a notch filter a couple back. So a notch filter removes a signal at a certain frequency, and a notch filter, when you're turning the dial, it in itself has a it's scanning the frequency that you're on, and depending on where you're moving that, a notch filter, it's going to cancel out part of depending on where you turn it, it's going to cancel out part of that frequency. And you just have to turn it and find that sweet spot where your interference is. So that's one of the answers they give you that can't be it. Notch filter here. Because they're asking which of the following could be used to remove power line noise or ignition noise. Usually ignition noise and power line noise is going to be across all frequencies. You're not going to hear, when you have interference from a power source, it's going to be all over the place. It's not going to be at a very particular frequency. So if you get on the radio and no matter where you tune at, you're constantly hearing the same interference, a cyclic sound, a tap, 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 or zzz, 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 zzz. You know that you have some kind of power source around you, around your radio, that is causing that. My first bet would go to look at those wall warts I was telling you about, those little. If you go outside and away from your house and you key up and you don't hear it, then you know that where you heard it before, you're the closest to it. Okay. So again, I go through and explain why the answers, which ones are wrong and why they can't be right. I'll let you read that up on it later. So which of the following is a use for the scanning function of an FM transceiver? So you take frequencies, you set them to a channel, and those channels already have the offset and the tone for that frequency, and that grouping of settings creates the channel to get you into a repeater. The scan function just simply goes through each one of those channels. That's all it does, just scans through a range of channels, okay? So, I don't ever use the scan feature on my radio. I don't really, I haven't found really a reason to use it. You may, some people do. They like to be able to do it. I personally don't. It's just a personal choice. But if you have a wide range, if you live somewhere, say, in LA's probably got 50 repeaters around it. You probably need the scan function, right? Where I live, at my home, I probably have 2 repeaters that I can hit with a Baofeng radio if I'm lucky and I'm outdoors. Okay? On a Baofeng. So I don't need the scan function, right? I just switch between those two. All right, so let's go on to section 5. Stay with me for a second. I'm going to go to section 5. Give me a second here. There we go. Stay with me. Okay. All right, let's jump into section 5 real quick, okay? So in section 5, we're going to start talking about the electrical principles, okay? We're going to start getting into electrical components and a little bit of math. The good thing is that, again, remember I told you at the very beginning when you can fail every math question on this test and you can still pass the test easily. I would say on a given test, you're allowed to miss 9 questions, okay? So 35 questions, must get 26 right. That means you got room for 9 mistakes. I think those are good odds. Do you agree? I think they're pretty good odds. I would say that on the math test, you may have 5 or 6 questions total. And when I show you this one little trick, I'm going to narrow that down for you. So let's jump right into it. See if we can make this as simple as possible. So electrical current, this is the part, Eddie, that you are going to ace. This is going to be a snore fest for you, so hang in there for me. Electrical current is measured in which of the following units? Okay. So I'm trying to give you a pictorial here. When we talk about electricity, as a beginner, transpose the idea of electricity into water. Okay. Electricity flows through wire, right? Well, water flows through a pipe. What is wire? It's a pipe. Okay. If you constantly, when we're talking about these questions, if you can constantly be able to transfer it into a meaning of water, electrical concepts will make so much more sense to you. Okay. I know myself, like a lot of people, electrical is very daunting to, but once you grasp the concept, just some of the basic concepts, the guys that grasp it, you don't have to think about it. So again, when we think about the pipe size you can think of as resistance, right? The bigger the pipe, the more water that can go through it. So would you rather put your house out with a garden hose or a fire hose? Why would you use a fire hose to put a fire out in your house? Because you're going to put more water on the spot, right? Well, the idea in electrical is you want to use the thickest feasible line that you can. You don't want to go too thick in electrical because you can run into some issues, but you never want to undersize your wire for the job at hand. You don't want to use wire that's as thick as a strand of your hair to wire your house, would you? But at the same time, you don't want to use wire that is thick as your ankle to wire your house. One of the reasons why you couldn't get around the bends. Okay, so think of water pressure as the voltage. Okay, voltage is what is pushing, is what pushes the power, pushes the current up the line. So if you keep this pictorial representation in mind, and this is the section where I'm going to use a lot of inferences of pictures and things like that, help you remember. And I hope and I really pray that it'll congeal for you and make so much more sense for you. Okay. So the electrical power is measured in which of the following? Okay. It's watts. Again, and we go back to the energy created. Whoops. The energy created out of all these combined is going to give you the wattage. And that's, we measure, when with light, the term wattage can be used as a unit of measure for lot of things. Okay, so but when you hear watts, usually you think of light, right? Because, and the reason why we do that with lights is because light is something visual. It's something that you can easily see. You can see the difference in wattage in a bulb. A bulb that allows more wattage in it, typically, not always, but typically is going to run a lot brighter. Now the unit of light that it produces is lumens, right? But the amount, the power or the output capability of that bulb is measured in watts. There's Michelle again to burn us out. We got to throw that 7-year-old up in your face. What is the name of the flow of electrons in an electric circuit? All right. Well, that's all current is. It's just a flow of electrons. All right. So, again, think in terms of water. What do you call the flow of water? The same thing you call the flow of electricity, current. All right. So I give you this little analogy here, you know, and think about voltage when it's at its starting point where the energy is created is going to have a lot more amperage to it. Over the course of the longer you make a wire and the longer you expect to push that current through the wire, you're not going to get the same amount of amperage out of a piece of wire that is 10 foot long than you are out of a piece of wire that's a mile long. Okay? Is the higher the wattage mean the volts is higher as well. Eddie, this is going to be so review to you. If you could help me out and help with some of the questions, brother, I appreciate it because I have full confidence you know how to answer these. You'd be a great help with me in this because this is so much review for you that you can maybe dumb it down for them. Well, I want to keep going with and I don't want anybody to get ignored because this is kind of complicated. When you have questions, I want you to be able to ask them when you have them. It's really important that you get your questions answered. Out of everything on the test, this is a very important part of getting your questions answered. So, Eddie, if you help me out with that, I appreciate it. Oh, Eddie, you'll do fine, man. So, what is the name for a current that flows only in one direction? Okay. Well, that makes sense. Let's go ahead and knock out normal current, okay? What is normal current? You can be normal and go both ways, right? If you go in one, so these two, C and D, just don't make sense. You and I always know we either have AC or DC, right? You're only going to get two, AC or DC. Well, if you went both ways, it would alternate, right? Go one direction, one, alternate, go the other direction, alternate, go the other direction, alternate. So direct is just one way. I'm going from here to Vegas direct. When you get on a flight, you don't have any layovers, you don't have to stop anywhere. What are you doing? You're going one direction direct. I think that's an easy one to remember. So current that flows only in one direction can be found in circuits that are used as batteries for the power source. Okay, cars, handheld devices. There is a positive and negative. It's referred as direct current. So the current in your house, though, it alternates directions. There's a hot and there's a neutral. But the neutral is just a ground that the electricity can flow to. The current alternates in a sine wave from negative to positive. And a sine wave, if any of you guys are preppers, you bought inverters, you know what a modified sine wave is. And a sine wave is the purest form. It's, in Carolina, we call it sweet tea. Okay? Sine wave is sweet tea. It don't get much better. So, good. Thank you, Jason. That's awesome. Absolutely, man. I am there with you. Electricity is not exactly something I wake up to every day thinking. So, if I can make it simple, then man, It has certainly helped me. So, what is the electrical term for the electromotive force that causes electron flow? Okay. So I'm going to get to a. I'm going to show you a picture here in a little bit. It's going to make so much sense to you when you see the picture. So, the electrical. When you think of EMF, it's not the band. It's not the electric dance band from the '80s. What was that song? Unbelievable. Anyway, no, it's that. That's not it. It's voltage. Okay. So, and it's kind of hard to add what's already here, you know. But I will tell you that you're never amp hours are never going to be. Amp hours really refers to capacity, especially when it comes to batteries. Voltage, capacitance, inductance are really the only thing. So voltage is the electrical term for EMF that causes electron flow. Capacitance is the ability to store energy in a capacitor. How much energy does it store? How much capacity does the capacitor have? Is how much it stores. Inductance refers to the ability to store energy in a coil of wire or a magnet, which will then oppose a change in current. So ampere hours is just a term to indicate the capacity of a battery. So I have batteries on standby in down below my road case here. They're 35 amp hours a piece. So I have, let's see, I'm counting teeth and toes. No, I got 70 amp hours worth of battery time to use on my radio. Now, how much? Some people say, well, then how much time would you get on that radio? Well, it's not 70 hours. Okay, it depends on how much power I'm using in my radio, and that's a whole other math equation that we'd have to get to at some other time. You start getting if you ever take an extra exam, it deals with in there. Okay, so obviously none of these answers could refer to EMF. Okay, only voltage refers to EMF. How much voltage does a mobile transceiver typically require? Mobile transceiver. When they say mobile, they mean car, okay? They don't typically mean your handheld. Your Baofeng is mobile in this sense, but it's a handheld, okay? Mobile in terms of testing is referring to what goes in your car. Well, I will tell you, everything you buy on ham radio, there are some radios that have a power supply built into them, but there are not very many of them. And they're really expensive. Okay? Not because they have a power supply built into them, because of all the other features. Okay? Kenwood makes an HF rig that has the power supply built into it. The radio is approximately 2.5 feet wide. It weighs about 35 pounds, and it costs you almost $10,000. Okay? It has more buttons and lights and crap on it that doesn't make sense to the average person. So a little bit off task here, but just think of when mobile transceiver, think of your car. What is the voltage of your car? Of your electrical system in your car is 12 volts, okay? Everything you buy in ham radio just about can go directly and be connected to your car battery.
Victor Delta 08, just checking the ham net.
So how much voltage does it typically have? Only one answer here is going to make sense. Really only two of these could possibly. 120, which is your house, and 12 volt. Okay? Since they're saying mobile, think back to your car and think 12 volts, okay? Car batteries are about 12 volts, technically closer to 13.8, but we slangily say 12 volts. And since mobile transceivers are mostly common use in a car, they are designed to run at about that. So typically most ham radio, base station equipment, desktop equipment, you have to buy a separate power supply that converts that 12 volts. It converts the 120 volts coming into the power supply and converts it to 12 volts that the battery, or 13.8, that the radio can run on. Okay, so all my radios, I could go right out of my car right now, pop the hood, sit it on the edge, and take the red and black wire and connect it to the battery, and it will light up and work beautifully. Beautifully. If I bring it into the house, I have to have a separate box, a power supply that converts the wall voltage into the voltage that the radio can accept. So, and that's kind of convenient because you can use car batteries to run a ham radio. In an emergency, at the very least, you don't have power, you can go out and undo your car battery, bring it in. There's some cautions when it comes to lead acid batteries. That's another discussion. But the point is the raw fact is you can simply connect your radio to your car battery and you have power to be able to get a signal out and ask for help. Okay. Even if you don't have power to your house. Which of the following is a good electrical conductor? Well, since we were in elementary school, we've always known that anything metal is a good conductor of electricity, right? And anything non-metal is a good insulator. So the general rule of thumb, metal tends to be the good connector. Water is also a conductor, is a good conductor, but it's not the water itself. It's the minerals in it, in the water. So, distilled water is not going to be as good of a conductor as seawater is. If that makes any sense to you, okay? So it's not the water that's conducting the electricity. It is, but not nearly as much as the metals that the minerals that are in the water. Glass, wood, rubber, ceramics, things like that. They don't conduct electricity, so they're going to be insulators. And so I gave you a little bit of a. So again, I say no. Salt water is a conductor. So are you. You're a conductor because of the minerals in your body that your body stores. So which of the following is a good insulator? Well, they give you three choices here. Mercury is a liquid metal, so it's going to fall in line with the metal. So the only one here that's non-metal is going to be glass. It's really the only answer. And the way that I give you you don't see this quite as much today. Whoops. But this is at the top of your power lines. Years ago, this is what it looked like. It does to some extent in some areas, especially in some third world countries and some more undeveloped countries. This is what it would look like. If you ever look up the top of your power line and you see it looks like bells, it looks like a stack of bells on like a rod. Those bells are usually made out of ceramic. Some kind of porcelain material, and they're just meant to be insulators. So just remember, if it's looking for a conductor, it's looking for something that conducts electricity, which would be metallic. On the test, it's looking for an insulator, it's something non-metallic. So the only thing listed on here that's non-metallic is glass. What is the name for a current that reverses direction on a regular basis? So we talked about one direction being direct. I want to say that I would think that this is a gimme. This question is a gimme. I really find it hard to believe that somebody might get this wrong. If you do get it wrong, you're rushing. Because if you really think about it, it's telling you reverses direction. It alternates direction. Right? I mean, it's standing right there. So there are two types of current you need to worry about. The kind in your house is AC. Okay. And it alternates in a direction over time. Typically, your household electricity is on 60 hertz. So it's 60 times that it goes from positive to negative and back a second. It's that fast. Okay, so the RMS voltage, the mean square, you don't need to know this for the test. I'm trying to give you some depth here to give you as much. I'm hoping that out of this explanation, there's something in here that grabs you, that helps you remember. Okay, it's not my intent to confuse you. It's to give you as much explanation as I can, because we all grasp onto a different understanding of something. Okay, we all operate a little differently. So The most common use of current, direct current is your batteries, okay, in your car. So ham radios love to work on direct current. Which term describes the rate at which electrical energy is used? Okay. So when you look at these, I could see where you might think that it could be any one of these. So power is the product of the electric current at a specified amount of EMF, of voltage. Now I didn't create. I found this diagram here. So imagine you have a plate, okay, a thin piece of metal against the wall. The more wattage you have, the more water comes out the end of the hose and is able to make that plate flex. I would think that this nozzle here, let me get me a laser pointer. There you go. This nozzle here could be considered a resistor. It's helping resist some of the current. Okay, it's bringing more focus to the current so that it comes out in a little bit sharper, more powerful stream. The valve serves as a resistance. Okay, so I hope that you look at these pictures and again, for you, and maybe it'll serve a way, especially if you think of water. So resistance is the opposition of the current flow. So it definitely couldn't be considered as a viable answer. Again, power is the product of the electrical current. What is the unit of EMF? Okay, it's the volt. Again, we'll go back to the picture here. Okay. You think of the pressure of the water would be the voltage. And there's a picture that I'll have in here. Hopefully I'm coming across it. We'll come up on it. It'll make maybe it'll help you make a little bit of sense here. But I go through and explain what each one of these are. You know, amps would be how much water is actually flowing through the pipe. How much water is actually flowing. The wattage is going to be the total amount of usable water that the pipe contains. If there was something on the end of this pipe, no matter how much pressure was coming up this pipe, if you had a valve or a nozzle on the end, that would be a resistor, okay? Because it would reduce the size of your pipe output, okay? What describes the number of times per second that an alternating current makes a complete cycle? So just remember, frequency determines how frequently the current reverses direction. Okay, so I gave you other units of measure and how we measure those. We measure wavelengths in meters. And we measure the frequency and the number of times per second that wavelength travels, okay? Which type of current is what type of current circuit is current the same through all its components? Okay, so it's going to be a series. There's only two here that you need to remember in this question, okay? There's only two types of circuits that you are going to have to really worry about: series and parallel. Okay, resonant and branch you don't need to worry about. Resonant we talk about when it comes to an antenna. The sweet spot of an antenna where there's the least amount of resistance and the greatest amount of output. So I hope I've actually made this animated here. So in a series, current is the same through all the components. Okay. The voltage may not be the same everywhere. And remember, that's the voltage is what's pushing it, but the current is. So if these were a bunch of people trying to get through a hallway, you could have 50 people. You're not changing the number of people, but you can change the size of the body of the bouncer that's pushing them out, right? So the easy way to remember this is the difference between series and parallel is parallel is like railroad tracks that run side by side. Series is like a movie series, one episode after another. Okay? And that's really what you really remember. Parallel like railroad tracks run side by side, and series like a movie series, one episode after another. In which type of circuit is voltage the same across all components? Remember, parallel, side by side, it's the same. All right? Railroad tracks. Notice the green is the same across all the components. There is a full source voltage on one side and no voltage on the other. But voltage is the same across all components because they're in parallel. In a schematic, when you see this little line here, and you're going to get to that too, that's a sign of a resistor. Kind of makes sense when you look at a schematic diagram. Just throwing a little bit of something out there, but you are going to run into that. Okay. How many milliamps is in 1.5 amps? When you see amperes, just amps. Amps is just a concatenated version of amperes. So, folks, I can tell you that maybe Eddie has a good analogy to remember. You know, the millis, the micros. I'm about to go through a series of different pictures, and I'm hoping that one of them helps grab you and helps you remember in some kind of order. But I will tell you that what I tell most folks is that starting out as an amateur, getting into this, understanding micros, millis, decas, hectos, things like that, we learned it back in school, but most of us haven't been to school in 30, 40 years. So come on, you know, so hopefully one of these pictures will get you, okay? So the prefix milli means 1,000th. So move the decimal right 3 places or multiply by 1,000 to go from amperes to milliamps. A great way to check each answer is to remember that to convert to milliamps to amps, just change the comma to a decimal point. Okay? I'm going to just take a second, leave it on there so you can kind of get a picture of, but we're not going to expect you. I mean, most of us understand, especially in this computer age, a kilo, a mega, and a giga. Kilobyte, megabyte, gigabyte, and then terabyte. Now we're up to terabytes, right? So these first top 4, I can tell you that in ham radio and on your test, you're only going to have to remember a few of these. You're really not going to have to remember most of these, okay? There's only a handful and the great thing is you're getting exactly what's going to be on the test you have here. So at the very least, just memorize the answer. What is another way to specify a radio signal frequency at 1,500,000 hertz? Well, I can tell you that if you look at all these here, to gigahertz, you can take that one out of the equation. As a technician, gigahertz is not going to be in your peripheral vision of in your scope of knowledge. You're not, so if you take off to go to 1,000, you would take off 3 zeros. Well, if you took off 3 zeros, that would be 1,500 and be kilohertz. Take off 3 zeros to make it a kilohertz. If you wanted to know how many megahertz this is, it would be 1.5 megahertz, right? 53 years out of high school, yeah. So 1.5 megahertz Mega being million. So kilohertz would be 1500. Pay attention when you get these questions. Approximately 30% of applicants who saw this question over a 2-year period answered 1500 megahertz instead of 1500 kilohertz. So I'm pretty sure that they actually didn't know how to do the conversion. They just rushed it and missed the detail of the megahertz and the kilohertz. Okay. This is a particular question here that you want to pay. I have seen this on the test. I've seen it on quite a few of the tests. Okay. And they give you 1500 in 2 of the answers. You have to decide between megahertz and kilohertz. How many volts are equal to 1 kilovolt? Well, a kilo is 1,000, right? We said that 1,000th is a milli. Now you would think milli mean million, but mega is million. 1,000th is milli. 1 million volts would be a megavolt. So this is one that some people have said makes sense to them, okay? King Henry died unusually drinking chocolate milk. It sounds so ridiculous, but it's those ridiculous things that we tend to remember, okay? So I'm only leaving it here for a second. I'm not. Pay attention down here at the bottom, okay? I found this to be of good use to me is when you divide numbers by 10 if you are getting bigger. Same as moving the decimal point 1 space to the left as you move in this direction. Okay? When you multiply, you're going to the right in this direction. And when you take the test, you will get a blank piece of paper. A white blank piece of paper. That blank piece of paper can be of great use to you. If you want to write down King Henry died unusually drinking chocolate milk. Now, the guys are walking around proctoring the test, when they look over and they see you write that, don't be surprised if they giggle. Not because of what you just wrote being funny, it's because they know that you are taking a very structured approach at trying to pass this test. And that's what they're giggling at, is because they have heard this term as well. That's what they would be probably laughing at. Okay. How many volts are equal to 1 microvolt? So we said 1,000th was milli. 1 millionth is micro. 1 million would be mega, and 1,000 kilovolts. 1,000 kilovolts would be the same as 1 million volts, right? 1,000 kilovolts would be so these would be the two of the same answer. Correct me if I'm wrong. 1,000 kilovolts would be 1 million volts. 1,000 times 1,000. So micro is a prefix in the metric system, meaning 1 millionth. Now, this one here said King Henry died unusually. Well, this one makes better sense. King Henry doesn't usually drink chocolate milk. I've heard people like the died one or doesn't, your choice. But it will help you put into a hierarchy of kilo, hecto, deca, your base unit of either it's a meter, a gram, a liter, you know. So this helps as well. I will tell you that this right here, if you can remember this, King Henry doesn't usually drink chocolate milk. I think that this diagram here, out of all of them, is going to help you quite a bit. on the test. So which of the following is equal to 500 milliwatts? Okay, 1,000 milliwatts is equal to 1 watt. Remember, there are 10 millimeters in 1 centimeter and 100 centimeters in a meter. So 1,000 millimeters is a meter. I know you totally got that. You totally understood what I just said. It's going to sink in and stick. I just know it. Like flypaper, right? Let's drudge through these. It's not. It gets better. If an amp meter, just a meter, but an amp meter calibrated in amps is used to measure a 300 milliamp current, what reading should it show? So if we go back, he was talking about the 500 hill, and we said a millimeter, 1,000 millimeters is a meter. 3,000 milliamps would be 3 amps. Now, you don't have to take that King George usually doesn't drink chocolate milk, doesn't, yeah, whatever it was. You don't have to remember that in that particular way. Come up with your own. In fact, I would say that if you came up with your own, you would remember it better. So you can take one of these when you go to study later and create your own phrase out of all these. If a frequency display calibrated in megahertz shows a reading of 3.525 megahertz, what would it show if it were calibrated in kilohertz? Well, if you take the megahertz, there's 1,000 hertz to make a kilohertz, right? It would take 1,000 kilohertz to make a megahertz. So you just simply move your zeros over 3. Now, I will tell you that some of these, when you see that this is, some people, they find this easier. The exponent number is the number of zeros. So a kilo is 10 to the 3rd power, 3 zeros. Mega is 10 to the 6th power because there's 6 zeros. You find what works for you. I have a hard time with my students being able to express one way to remember something because one person may get it and 3 don't. You have to find your sweet spot on how you remember things. So I'm trying to, each one of these answers, I'm trying to give you different pictorial representations of the same thing. And hopefully one of them will stick for you, okay? And if nothing of it sticks, memory. You just got to commit it to memory. You take one of these testing apps on your phone, or QRZ.com, you use theirs or whatever, repetition. Get it pop up more than once, and it'll help commit it to memory, right? So how many microfarads are equal to 1 million picofarads? Oh my God. I know some of y'all right now are just rubbing your temples right now. Bear with me, please. Don't be discouraged. This is such a small part. Such a small part. Remember, out of all these questions I just showed you, only 4 of them could possibly be it, right? And I've already shown you 6, 7 of them. So remember the order of your metric units. Okay. And I've tried to write it out some. You could go back, and again, you're talking about the milli, micro, nano, and pico. If we go back to this one right here, milli, micro, nano, and pico, okay? They give you the units in this one. Micro, the reason why they mention microfarads and nanos and picos because capacitors a lot of times will use micro they'll use below here, your micros, your nanos, and your millis, and even your pico for little finer, smaller electronic parts. That's why you're seeing it. Leah, flatline, is that what's supposed to mean is flatline? Your your AKG is just bottomed out, right? I get it, girl. It's like I said, I feel your pain. We're on this journey together, and I just want to give you as many possible memory devices, and hopefully one of them will stick free. So if a frequency display, again, is 3.525 megahertz, what would it show if it was calibrated kilohertz? Move the decimal over 3 points. So it'd be, again, 3.5 megahertz. I can look at that. I don't know. I don't keep all this to memory, but being in ham radio, especially in HF, I can look at this and it makes sense to me because I just had a little bit of time in ham radio to see it. But by no means am I an expert in it, okay? Water bottles. Megahertz is 1,000 times more than kilohertz. So just, again, see what works for you. Okay, Dean, there you go, man. Half a liter is 500 milliliters. I mean, we all have, for whatever reason, something sticks to us. And again, I brought this one up again. What is the approximate amount of change measured in decibels of a power increase from 5 to 10 watts? This is a little important for you. It doesn't make sense when you're reading this right away, but it does make sense. So, you know, the Baofeng radio is they call it a 5-watt radio, but it's really about 4 watts. Okay. So if you were to say, wow, you know, Dean went out and bought a UV82 model that's 7 watts. Okay. Well, how much more power can I expect to get between a 4 watt and a 7 watt? Well, your decibels is going to be the unit of measure that you're going to want to measure that in. So in that example, that's why they're making you accustomed to this, is because they want you to understand the difference in just a small amount of wattage, how much more of a gain that you can see. When dealing with decibels, every 3 decibels of gain doubles the power. And every 3 decibels of loss halves it. So 5 watts to 10 watts is twice the power. So it is 3 decibels. 5 watts to 20 watts would be 4 times. So it'd be 6 decibels. 9 would be 40 watts. 12 dBs would be 80 watts, and etc. Okay. Don't worry about reading this right now. And you're like, huh? Read it a few times in review. In your replay, read it a few times. And once you read between the lines and read it a few times, it'll stick to you. It makes sense to me, but I know that the nuns didn't teach this back in 1970. Yeah, but they taught you how a yardstick, how it feels, how a wooden ruler and a yardstick feels. No kid that went to Catholic school is a stranger to the end of a yardstick or a ruler. So just read that and commit it, and read it enough times, and you'll get it. It'll sink in for you. What is the approximate amount of change measured in decibels of a power decrease from 12 watts to 3 watts? When dealing with decibels, every 3 decibels of gain doubles the power. Every 3 decibels of loss halves it. Again, I just rewrote it for you. Okay. So every 3 decibels, so you would be a -3, right? So you're talking, do your math. Dad got kicked out. I'm not even going to ask. Not even going to go there. I thought that's where you were going, Dean. So again, for the sake of time, I can't spend a whole lot of time with this. I just want to be able to provide you some memory tools that hopefully when you read through these, something will stick for you and help you make sense. I really wish I had more time to be able to go through it, but I'm trying to give you as many tools as I can to help explain some of these things. You could go out and Google it yourself. I'm sure you could. I'm hoping that I can consolidate a little bit more of it in one place for you. So what is the amount of change measured in decibels of a power increase from 20 watts to 200 watts? For every 3 dB of gain, doubles the power. Every negative 3 dB of gain, or 3 decibels of loss, halves it. So looking at this, 3 decibels of gain, 20 times 2 would be 40. 6 decibels of gain would be 80. 9 would be 160. 12 would be 320. So you know if it isn't 12, but it's more than 9, it must be 10. So just look at that. Again, they're going back and they're asking you 200 watts. You're going from 20 to 200. Okay. So just use the power of doubling. Okay. Read that a few times again. Which of the following frequencies is equal to 28,400 kilohertz? Well, if I'm going from kilo to mega, I'm just going to move my decimal to the left 3 times. Okay. So 28.4. Now all these here. Now you got to remember, again, be mindful. Look at D. It's got 28.4 in it too, but it has kilohertz. But if you look at the question, it's already given you kilohertz. Requires a little bit more than converting the comma to a decimal, right? Commas don't change the value of numbers, decimals do. So just kind of hope that sticks. Could you read that for a second? Whoops. If a frequency display shows a reading of 2425 megahertz, what frequency is that in gigahertz? Well, you remember from kilohertz to megahertz, you move to the left 3. From megahertz to gigahertz, you move to the 3 more. If you're going from gigahertz to tera, remember, and I think in this one, maybe in this computer age, we're used to hearing megabytes, gigabytes, terabytes, kilobytes. So we have bytes, we have kilobytes, then we have megabytes, then we have gigabytes, and then we have terabytes, right? If that helps you a little bit here, maybe it doesn't. But if you want to remember which one goes in front of another, I don't know. I'm a computer guy for a living, so maybe it makes sense to me in that analogy and how I would break it down. Maybe you break it down differently according to what makes sense for what you do for a living. So, oh, no problem, right? Think out loud, man. Think out loud, because somebody else might be wondering. Somebody might be wanting to hear your tune and sing it too, right? If a frequency display shows, again, so 2.425. So again, if you went from, it's a matter of moving 3 places when you go from hertz to kilohertz to megahertz to gigahertz. What is the ability to store energy in an electrical field called? So the only difference between a capacitor, a capacitance, and inductance, they both do the same thing. They both store energy, but capacitance stores it in an electrical field, and inductor stores it in a magnetic field. Okay? For me, that's how I remember that. You know, when you get up into the extra exam, they talk about antennas and what they call a capacitance hat. It's a disc that can be put on an antenna. Again, I'm going a little bit out of off the radar here a little bit, but it didn't make sense to me when I took the technician test quite as much. But when I got into ham radio and I started, talking to others and getting into the hobby, it just all started clicking for me and it made sense. To where now I can talk in ways that might be confusing to you that aren't to me. And I have to always remember that I was in your shoes at one time. So, and it's just a matter of familiarity, that's all. So again, the ability to store energy in an electrical field is a capacitance. So a capacitor is a passive component that consists of at least one pair of conductors separated by a dielectric. Okay, dielectric is just an insulator of some sort. That's all dielectric means. Foam, plastic, air can be dielectric. So when voltage is applied to the capacitor, so it creates a difference in potential between the two. It creates an electrical field across that dielectric, which stores the energy. So the easiest way to remember these is that an inductor, being a coil of wire, is used to create an electromagnetic. And again, you can think of electromagnet as wrapping coil of insulated wire around a nail. So an inductor stores energy in a magnetic field. Capacitor stores it in an electrical field. Okay, and if you remember these two right here, magnetic, inductance, electric, capacitance, you'll be able, it'll get you through a couple of questions in here. So again, and this right here, air variable capacitor, that is a tuner. That's exactly inside of an automatic tuner. That's what it looks like. If you open up the box, you'll see that. So I wanted to give you I wanted to give you what the electrical, and when you look at the schematic symbol, you're going to get into schematic symbols, but it looks like a capacitor. I mean, when you look at it, if you know what it does, plates, they're conductive plates that are separated by an insulator. Well, there's the plates and there's an insulator right in the middle. Inside of these little wafers here, there are plates, and then there's usually a piece of paper, cardboard, of some kind of insulator between them. You remember insulators are what? Rubber, glass, wood, paper. What is the basic unit of capacitance? Is a farad. So it's named after Michael Faraday. A lot of you may have heard of Faraday cage. Okay. So I wanted to list some other units here that are of importance to you. Volt for voltage, ohm for resistance. The best way to remember ohm is there's a picture you might see online, and it's a bunch of monks standing around in a yoga stance going ohm, ohm, and at the top it says join the resistance. That's how I kind of remember that the easiest. Henry, I'm going to show you hopefully some ways to remember. Henry, I remember Henry the Duck. Cartoons, I don't know where it was, but there's cartoons that always seems like Henry's a good name for a duck. I don't know why, and I just have always remember Henry the Duck. Henry for inductance. Here's the picture I wanted you to see. Here's the voltage kicking amp in the butt to get it through the narrow opening. And ohms is the resistance that's trying to tighten that opening to keep the amps from going through. Okay. Now I want you to remember these symbols, and these are going to be a little bit important, and I'm going to show you why, and hopefully you'll be able to, and maybe it'll help you remember the symbols for them when I get to them in a minute here. So the ability to store energy in a magnetic field, what was the store energy in an electrical field was what? Capacitance. The converse of that, conversely, is magnetic field is, remember, we got, what is a radio wave? magnetic, right? So we got two components, electro and magnetic. The electro side, capacitance, the magnetic side, inductance. So these do tie together. There is some relationship to these. Okay, an inductor is a coil of wire, usually around a non-ferrite, a non-magnetic core. Again, the basic unit of inductance is the Henry. So whenever you make a coil of wire, it creates a magnetic field. Capacitance is very similar. It's just the opposite. That's all. And it's just used on the electrical side of the equation. The inductor does the exact same thing, but on the magnetic side of the equation. Here's inductors. Just wire wrapped around. So we have different, all these are different inductors here. I have an antenna, and look at the schematic. Why do you, doesn't that, look at that, it's coils, right? Once you see what an inductor is, doesn't the schematic symbol make sense now? Right? Because it reminds you of coiled wire. And all these can be, I use this example right here, this exact one. I built an antenna called an end-fed, I'm going to type it out. It's called EFHW antenna. In-fed half wave antenna. I use this type of antenna for SHTF, Tiatwaki antenna. It's something that I can coil up. I can keep in my spare tire compartment. It's a little box that I have. I put one of these inductors in it. And I just have one wire that runs out of the box that I can throw. I can tie a rock around a 550 cord, attach a 550 cord to the wire, throw it up over a tree, and I can lay the box on the ground. I can set it on my car, do whatever I want. Run coax in the end of the box, but I can make my own. It costs me less than 20 bucks to make them. Okay, we've got 5 more minutes. I'm going to go 5 more minutes, and then I'm going to cut out here. I want to get as far as I can into this. So what is the basic unit of inductance? Is the Henry. How do we remember that? So again, the inductor is just a passive electrical component that stores energy in a magnetic field named after Joseph Henry. Just remember Henry the Duck. I'm hoping you don't ever forget that. I hope that I burned that into your memory now. And when you see a cartoon with a duck named Henry, you're going to giggle and laugh, and hopefully you'll think of me in the future. So what is the unit of frequency? Well, we've talked about this plenty, right? It's hertz. Hertz is a standard unit of frequency. Is defined as the number of cycles per second of something periodic. So, example, a clock ticks at 1 hertz. A wall outlet is set to 60 hertz. Okay, so farad is the unit of farad or farad. You can call it whatever. It depends on where you're at. I guess north or southern. I don't know. I heard people say farad. I've even heard people say farad. Makes no, so whatever you want to say. So the other answers here that they're giving you, just they don't really make any sense as I've labeled them here. What does the abbreviation RF refer to? Just radio frequency. All right. I could actually see where you might get it confused with B, the resonant frequency of a tuned circuit. Resonant frequency, but it's radio frequency. It's not reflected force or any of these other choice. You just need to learn this one, radio frequency. So when they say RF interference, they mean some kind of radio frequency that is being emitted, that is leaking into your feed line. Okay, and a radio wave is made up of what type of energy? Remember, electromagnetic. Remember, this was in what, section 2 or 3? I believe this was a question that was just worded differently. And so, again, radio waves are made up of, you have waves that are perpendicular to each other. And I've given you a little bit of a diagram here showing you what a one wavelength is. At the point at a sine wave that it takes to go through a full cycle to return to that same point. Point to point is called a wavelength. So vertically, and this could be flipped. Vertically, you could have the electric field, and horizontally the magnetic field, or it could be reversed. Your vertical could be your magnetic. This isn't, don't worry about the left and right part of it. We're just giving you a little bit of a diagram. Okay. What is the formula used to calculate electrical power in a DC circuit? Now, I want to show you something really quick, and I've got 2 minutes to do it. How do you remember this? This was the other diagram that I wanted to give you. Stick with me just a couple more seconds here. And on the website, this PowerPoint is already there, so you can maybe get a little bit ahead and look at that for section 5. So when you draw these two circles, this Ohm's law, what's so great about this is if you can remember, the R is real easy, okay, and so is the P. If you can remember these, whatever they're asking for, if they're asking you for the volts, if you draw these circles and you just put your thumb over, I'm going to use red. If you just put your thumb over this, right, because they're asking what is the voltage of something, it would be current times resistance, side by side. If they were asking you what the resistance, how, you know, they gave you numbers and asked you how many ohms is it, it would be volts divided by amps over top of each other, a fraction. Do you see that? How that's laid out? We got some examples we're going to get into so that it'll make sense to you, but I just want to, if you draw these out on your blank piece of paper going into this test immediately and draw EIR on one and pi on the other like this, your test examiner is going to giggle because he's going to think this guy's prepared. He has taken a structured approach. And this is how you can find, by giving two of these, how you can find the third. And this is what I was talking about. I'm going to leave it here. We're going to cut class now while I leave this up here. And if you want to commit, you know, kind of look at it. If somebody said, what is the wattage if you have 10 volts and 5 amps, how much watts do you have? Well, you would drop your watts, which is your power, and you would drop your amps, which is the I. You know what I mean? So it would be this one, right? So you look at this for a little bit. Now, I'll take any questions anybody's got. We'll go ahead and cut it off here. We're at a good part clip of this, to where I think we're really close to being caught up right now, because the rest of the of this section is just questions asking you using these diagrams here. And if you can commit this to memory going into next week, you can, and this makes sense to you. If you draw these circles and use your thumb, it solves itself. I mean, it really does. It can solve itself. You don't have to use P, E, and I. You can use W, V, and A if you want. What works for you to memorize it? Anybody? And the reason why I remember the V for E is, you remember, is EMF is the volts. P is, you know, I know it's wattage because it's measuring power. P, power watts. So some of these I get, but for you, you might find something a little bit different. Anyways, we'll go ahead and conclude again. Anybody got any questions? Let's answer away. I got 19 of you, but I'll answer any of your questions. We got a little, well, we lost about 15 minutes tonight. If I hadn't had them 15 minutes lost, we would have been done with this section and been completely caught up. So, any questions? I'll let you commit these to memory. But using the thumb here, you're only going to draw 2 of these. Eddie, I hope that I hope this all made, like, you're well, I say you're an electrician, knowing what you do for a living. Now, I hope that I explain these, that you as a professional that understands this, that I hope the takeaway is that I did break it down to some really common denominator, really common lowest points. I hope. Does that make sense? Anybody got any questions, man? Ask away. I'm here for a little bit. Good, Eddie. That's because I'm not a professional. I don't mess with electricity. So not something that I hope that I broke it down. So anybody, like I said, questions about the radios, antennas, all right, Lee, have a good one. Thomas, Kathy, Jason. So thanks for sticking in with this. You're doing great. We finished week 5. We got 3 more weeks, and you guys are hanging in there, and I'm so proud of you. I really, truly am. I really mean that. This stuff isn't easy, and you guys are sticking with it, and I'm blessed to share this journey with you guys. Dean, regarding mobile reception, when we started the class, I had my radio on the desk. No reception. Moved the radio to the window, tuned into 2 different nets, clear as a bell. Well, what do you recommend for a home-based antenna, for a home-based radio and antenna? So I will type in what I have, and keep in mind, I think it's X500. Let me make sure. Keep in mind that what I type is, it might be a little expensive. Little. But it's one of those things, you get what you put into it. So now the X500 antenna, Dean, that antenna is like 13 feet tall. It's fiberglass, but it has it's like 4-gauge wire, copper solid core wire going up the middle of it. And about every 12 inches, it coils. And then it starts a straight length, and then it coils for about an inch, and then a straight length. And what those are stacked quarter waves. So I literally, inside this antenna, I think I have like 6 antennas in one. I can tell you that I live, so without giving away my AO, I live within the Charlotte area, the Charlotte region of North Carolina. And Simplex, I can talk to Winston-Salem. And I have it on a 50-foot mast, telescoping mast. I have it on a 50-foot Roan telescoping mast. And between me and Carol, Dean, we could probably help you. I know that we all live, we all live in a general vicinity of each other. That I know you live within my region, without giving it away. I know where you live, but so that's a great antenna. Radio wise, I'll tell you, I told somebody this earlier, and I really stick to this radio, TYT TH9800. This radio, it's $200. $200 radio, and it's a quad band radio. It does 2 meter, 440, 6 meter, and 10 meter. Okay. Now, you may not, this X500 that I told you, it's not designed for 6 meter and 10 meter. You have to get a quad band antenna to have all 4 bands. Okay. The antenna it's mobile. I cannot think of the name of it right now. Stay on for a second. Let's see. TH9800 antenna. Let me see if I can get you. So the antenna typically is going to have like a TH or HH9800 is the antenna. Well, they have all different types of names. I don't want to get too much into the minutia of, but let's see here. I'm going to put that over here. Let's see if you see this. Hold on here. Hold on, stick with me for a second here. I think we're done with class, so I can. Okay, so we're done with class, so I'm going to go ahead and show you. So this is the this one says it's unavailable, but it comes stacked. Let's see if I can show you. First of all, let me type in the antenna that I said, X500. Here gives you a good idea of the antenna. Right here. It comes in 3 sections. I've painted mine black so that when you're going down the road, it blends right into the trees in the background. I don't want people going down the road and seeing I have this big white stick 50 feet up in the air that says that I've got good electronic equipment in my house. So, and look here what I was talking about. This is, so it's X510, sorry. I said, so it is a Diamond X510 is what it's called. Okay. And it's a series of stacked antennas. Great, phenomenal antenna. I said the TH9800 to show you what that I'm going to get to you guys' question in just a minute. I want to show you what it looks like. This is what the Yaesu makes one of these. It's like 450 bucks. TYT makes the exact clone of it, exact clone for $200. Okay, and it does quad band. It does everything that the Yaesu one does. It operates the same way. I can't tell the difference. I've had them side by side. I can't tell the difference. It's not the most perfect radio, but for $200, it's a powerhouse. It will get the job done. Now, what's my 2 meter that I prefer to use is a TMV71A. This is the radio that I personally prefer to use, but that's just me. This is the radio I was telling you about that I can do Echo Link. I can set Echo Link nodes into it. I can create an Echo Link station, have it connected to the internet. What I like about this radio is it goes with my Kenwood handheld, and I can actually control this radio from my handheld somewhere on my property. So the reason why I love my Kenwood handheld in this is because my handheld is 5 watts. I can come into on the A side of this, on this side, the A side, cross band repeat over to the B side and go out 50 watts. So go in 5 watts through the A bank. Crossband repeat function is in here, and it will transmit. It's basically a repeater in a box. It will transmit out what I say and take my handheld signal from on my property in 5 watts, and it will transmit it out across my X510 at 50 watts. At 50 feet above my house, 50 watts, I can talk to a lot of places around the state from my handheld in my yard. Okay. Hope that answered your question, Dean. I think Dean asked me, so I hope that answered it. Next question. Okay, Dean, you asked, move the radio to the window and tune to two different nets, clear as a bell. You did it from inside and no reception. Well, that kind of speaks for itself. You know, that again, you were probably on VHF. You remember what I said? VHF has a really hard time indoors getting out, because the wavelength is so long that it has a hard time getting through the windows and doors of your house and getting out and going through solid objects. If those nets were on UHF on 440, on some 440 frequency, you'd probably be able to hear from anywhere in your house. So why don't we always use 440? Because VHF doesn't require as much power to get as far. What takes 5 watts of VHF may take you 20 watts, or not even 20 watts. It may take you 10 watts of 440 to get the same distance. But 440 is able to go through objects a little bit better. So that makes sense. Next question. So you're in Tennessee, Richard. Is there a power supply to use? So is there a power supply to use? You know, I want to be honest with you. I use you can buy power supplies. Some people go out here and spend several $1,000s on, if you're looking at my screen, it's called an Astron power supply. And you probably have seen these. These things are bulletproof. You just can't blow them up. I mean, there's guys that have these power supplies. They're 30 years old, and they're still rocking them. They're heavy, and one of the reasons why they do so well is, see if I can find a picture. On the back of these things, they're just built so well. The heat sinks on them and everything are just unbelievable. Okay. Some of them have 2 of them, and these things go up quite a while. I recommend an Astron. The problem is that Astrons can run you $150, $200 new. So I'll be really honest with you. So I'm going to show you what works just as well. But ham radio power supply. You can take a power supply like out of a desktop computer, and you can use it. Then you can make a power supply out of it. I mean, it's really not rocket science. It really isn't. Here's another. I have a backup. My backup power supply that's in my Faraday cage looks like one of these. Okay, something similar, but it gives you the idea. It's not pretty with a bunch of gauges on the front like this Astron is. But it's durable, rock solid, no bells and whistles. It does what it's supposed to do. Bang. It gets me out there. Ray, can you keep this as part of the recorded class? I have to head out, and this is great info. I'm still recording, so it is still on here. So Ray, you should be good. I'm still going here. So Dean, what do you suggest when someone has an HOA and they are Nazis? 124 grain, Glock 19. There's several silencer companies out there. No, seriously. I hate HOAs. I honestly, I don't get where having an HOA to preserve your property rights or your property values provide you so much gain in that property value that it's willing to pay for my price of freedom to do what I want and how I want. You know, I can go out and buy out in the country and I can do whatever I want and don't have to worry about it. I don't get HOAs. I'm sorry. I don't understand honestly, the benefits of them. I can think of 10 or 20 disadvantages. I can only think of maybe one, maybe two advantages. More people I know have HOAs. They're nothing but trouble to get community upgrades done. Everybody I know that ever buys into one, it's buyer's remorse. You know, they end up just feeling like they're living in a penitentiary, period. So what do you suggest someone that has an HOA? As far as antennas go, where there's a will, there's a way. You can use loop antennas. You can put a loop antenna up in your attic. I will even say, so they have, for 2 meter, they have what they call a J-pole antenna. These things are not very expensive. Here's a good example of one. See if it comes up. You jerk. See if it comes up here. So this antenna here, they cost, you can buy them at Hamfest for like $35. You can make one too. They're out here on the they're out here on the web, just J-pole antenna. I'll type it in here. J-pole antenna. There are just diagram after diagram on how to make one, and you just use type M as in Mary, type M copper pipe. You know, if you've got a torch, a small little plumber's torch, and I mean, you can sweat some copper, and geez, I mean, you can make just any. Honestly, these are the best, and you can put these up in your attic. Put a little hole in the top of it and tie a loop of 550 cord, nail into your top beam of and just hang it from the beam, and then it's inside your attic. Nobody ever sees it. I mean, well, there's a will, there's a way. So that makes any sense. A loop antenna, you can. I'm getting your guys' questions in a minute, so hang in there for me. A loop antenna is what these look like. I've seen guys take these and put these in their house. These are a little bit expensive, but they are phenomenal antennas. They really are. People make them too. You can make them out of, here's a diagram on how to make them. It really isn't that hard. It really isn't. You know, the fun part about ham radio is here's one where they're using copper pipe and they're using 45-degree bends. They're just the great thing about ham radio is you can make antennas out of coat hangers, out of you know, just anything and everything. That antenna analyzer that I guys showed you at the beginning of this week's, at the end of last week's as well, those things are just, that's where you get your money's worth. Where you don't buy these expensive antennas, you make them yourself. If you have the antenna analyzer, it'll tell you what your SWR readings are at whatever frequency you want. Little dial, you dial in a frequency, and it'll tell you right there what the SWRs are at that frequency. You just build your own antennas all day long. I mean, so these can go up in your attic. I've seen people use flagpoles in their front yard. They run a copper line up the middle of it, and so if you type in stealth antennas, I just type that into the thing, you find a whole world of use. So bought one already, but I thought that's so Eddie, you can buy the power supply. Any radio that you buy for your car, you can use in your house. You just have to have a power supply to run it. That's all. The idea is that you're converting 110 volts to 12 volts. You're converting your household outlet to basically mobile power, and that's all that the power supply does. Is it stages it down to 12 volt. So any ham radio out there is built on a 12 volt system, but you just use a power supply to make up for that, and just set it on you don't need them special stand or none of that. Just set it on the desk, run the coax out the window, drill a hole in your ceiling, go up in the whatever, however you got to do it. The best feed line to get for 2 meter, personally, myself, I think is called LMR 400. That's coax. A little stiff, but it has the lowest amount of loss to it. Coax is always there's always a science to it. You can talk to ham radio guys and they will bore you to where you pile drive your head into a desk 100 times talking about it. Of course, you can use what works, but on a 50-watt radio, loss maybe isn't that important, right? If you lose 10 watts, what's the difference between 10 watts and 40? It's not a lot. But on a Baofeng, you only get 4 watts to play with. You'd kind of want to minimize that loss, right? Because if you lose any bit of that 4 watts, I mean, you're really, really cutting into the performance. So LMR 400 is a little, it can be, if you look around, you can get it cheap. I can get 100 feet of it for under 50 bucks. I can get 100 feet of it for about $30 right now. The other stuff that a lot of people like to use is called RG8X Mini. And you can get that. You can get 100 feet of that for 20 bucks. But it has a lot of loss to it for VHF, so I wouldn't recommend it. Okay, so do you... So try to get I tried to get to the question list at PrepperNet today to print out more of the questions, and it only kept bringing me back to the login page for the site. I've been able to print another 15 pages every week until now, and now I can't access it. Sam, I was there earlier today. In fact, I'll tell you what I'll do. Sam, if you're still on, give me a second here. Can you download it from... I'm sharing it right now. Can you download it? Look in the chat. I hope that you see it. Sam, if you're still on, I hope that you are, but I've just put it in the chat here. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The 6th icon is file sharing. Okay, Sam, I think the 6th icon is file sharing. I shared the question pool there just now in the chat room that we're in right now. Look around, see if you see something about file sharing. I'm right now sharing the question pool with you. And you should be able to download that file. Let me know. So I was going to go up here to preppernet.tech. I'm going to go in and sign in. I'm already signed in. So I've already gone up to, if I click on the test cool questions, and from there I could print it if I wanted to. So I'm at it right now. I don't, and of course, I've got all 5 sections, even the PowerPoint we're on right now. I've already put it up there. Now, of course, I don't have Class 5's videos on there yet because, so. Let's see. So click on the download file. Do you see it? See them? I'm hoping that I'm making it easier for you by sharing it here. Yep, I know, but wanted his opinion on what's best power supply. He recommended. I mean, as far as the power supplies again go, you can use anything, but personally, I just find these Astrons. There's exactly what I use right there. That is the exact one that I use. I don't know where you get those out of. I forgot, but that is where I'm perfectly what I use right now. It's my backup. I mean, my primary that I use is, I'm going to type it out and see if I get a picture. Woosan, that's the one that I use for my everyday. And Woosan didn't make this. There's probably about 20 different brands out there. But that right there is exactly, I mean, to the T. That might be a picture of mine. That's exactly what mine looks like. This is the one I use in my road case right now, every day. Is this one. They come in all, Woosan didn't make this. Some Chinese company makes it. There's probably 50 companies out there that slap their name on it. Isn't that common? But they slap their name on this and call it their own. It looks the same as, they're everywhere around here. A little bit different variation of it. I would, my suggestion is to you, try to stay away from MFJ. In the ham radio community, we call MFJ mighty fine junk. Okay, and the reason why we call it mighty fine junk is that when it's good, but when the problem is MFJ just has bad quality. They're like the Baofangs. When they're good, but you can easily buy a crappy one and it'll break in no time at all. I bought Baofangs and within a couple of weeks, the speaker part of it or the microphone breaks and I have to use an external microphone. The radio's still usable, but I've had one where I took it out of the box and a week later the LCD display on it went bad. So I could still use the radio, but I had to kind of guess what frequency I was on. And I had to make a mark on the top of the radio because I couldn't tell on the screen. But MFJ, the problem with it is that you could get two power supplies, same model, everything, and one of them will last you 20 years and the other one will last you a week. You just don't know. The quality assurance on them sucks. I mean, it's really bad. So we call it mighty fine junk because you just don't know what you're getting. MFJ is something I would try to stay away from. Not everything they make is bad, but it's really it's cheap stuff, and if you're on a budget, it works. It works. And I will stick up for MFJ and say that if it does break, they're a pretty reputable company. They will take it back and they will honor their warranties. The problem is, who in the hell wants to ship back a piece of equipment and then wait to get another one and you don't have anything in the meantime? You know, when you try to avoid not ever having to go through that. That's my point, is they will stick by their stuff, but at the same time, it's kind of a crapshoot if it's going to work for you. So, CM, or did you get it downloaded? You good? Eddie, did I answer all your questions? Dean, did I answer your questions? I'm going through them and make sure I didn't miss anybody. But that TYT radio, the Kenwood radio, TYT, all of them, you'll need a power supply to run them in your house. Out in the car, you won't. You can take the power supply out of the equation and just run it 10 gauge, 12 gauge minimum wire, 12 gauge minimum, 10 gauge being the best. Run 10 gauge wire from through your firewall and and mount it under the dash. A lot of these radios, like the TYT, has a removable faceplate. You can put the head unit under the seat and Velcro the one thing I like about the TYT radio is it comes with a separation cable. My Kenwood, I have to buy the separation cable separate, and it's like $60, and all it is phone cable. It's not, but it looks like phone cable. It has the RJ, was it RJ15 ends on them? It's stupid, and I pay $60 for it, and it literally looks like a phone line, but I can't use a phone line. The cable won't work. The TYT one comes with that cable already. There's another value to it for $200. It's like, and all you got to do is just separation cable, Velcro it to your dash, so all you see on your dash is the head, is the actual faceplate. But there's just a cable that you've got running down underneath, next to your console, underneath the seat, and that's where the actual head unit is. So, oh, good, good. So I'm glad. There you go, Dean. I hope I was validated that he told you, man, good radio. I mean, you're not getting a Cadillac, man. You're not getting a Corvette, but for $200, and it's solid, man. And it gets out and it does its job. You know, once you get it installed in your vehicle, you're not going to be taking it in and out. So mobile units tend to be a little bit more sturdier, and they tend to, as long as you put a fuse on the red wire, you tend to be good. I mean, if you know somebody's got a TYT, you can sit there and play with it and ask them, and there you go. You've already got an immediate source of support to show you how to program it. I will tell you, if you ever get the TYT, though, buy the programming cable, the optional programming cable. Buy it. They're not as easy as to get as the Baofeng, and it has you can't find the cable everywhere. I'll just tell you that. You won't find it. Cool. Awesome, CM. I'm glad I could help. All right. Any more questions? And I'm ready to rock, man. I'm ready to go. It's 11 o'clock. I'm going to snuggle up to the wife, and we're all good, folks. I'm going to cut out here. And if you have any questions, email me mercury01@preppernet.com. Mercury01@preppernet.com, and I'll get you answered. Okay, Eddie, go ahead, man. Go ahead. And just so y'all know what kind of radio my main rig that I run, this is my main go-to radio that I use. Okay, let's see what we got here. Well, I'm trying, Eddie. There we go. Yeah, so that cable right there is what you need. It looks a lot like a Baofeng cable. It has a different end to it. I remember you showing me this. That little piece right there, though, Eddie, here's the problem that I have with it. When you go, it's the edge of your trunk slips in on it. I tell folks the best place to put that is right up on the side of the trunk where the hinge is. Like right where the hinge attaches to the trunk lid, put it right there, because it's only about an inch away from the actual hinge. If some people go put it in the center of their hood, their back hood, and over time with that antenna, the wind whipping that antenna towards the back of the tendency to warp the lid a little bit, especially on these cheaper cars with the aluminum trunk lids. That's the only problem that I have with those. With these as well, you don't get you can't use the car doesn't have any contact with the antenna, because inside that little sleeve there is rubber, as you saw, So there is really no metal contact except the screws that you tighten down. That's the only contact. Whereas the antenna is screwed into the base and the magnet is attached to the base, the antenna is screwed into the base. It's all one unit. So when you stick that antenna down on the roof, you tend to get one continuous circuit, and the car serves as a ground plane. Whereas this kind of mount here, yeah, that mount right here, come on, that mount right there, it tends to cause it to kind of buckle but this cable right here, this end is the problem. That looks a lot like a Baofeng on this end, but that cable end is what you really need. And again, what I like about it is there's your separation cable right there. And you get to take that faceplate off. You get to put this end under the car, I mean under the seat or in the trunk if you want. It's long enough, you can put it in the trunk and just run it off. Here's the problem though. This is the only downside of this radio that I don't like is the mic plugs into the body and not the faceplate. And I don't like that, because if you put the body into the trunk, well, your microphone shouldn't go all the way to the trunk. It should just go to the faceplate. My Kenwood luckily goes to the, no, my Kenwood, as expensive as it is, it goes into the, I think this one, I'll be honest with you, I don't have it separated. But I believe that's the way. You'd have to check it, see where it plugs into. So can you disassemble that from the bracket and hard install the antenna? If you're talking about the antenna, you remember how the cops, they drill a hole in the hood and yeah, there is a mount. It's called I want to Google it first. Let me, is it called a Nemo antenna mount? I want to say it was called Nemo. You know what I'm talking about, though. It drills through the hood. Those are great, but then you got a hole in your hood, and then you got to buy a cap, and then you have to paint the cap to match when you go to. Oh, the microphone plugs into the face. Just good. Thanks for. I have one behind me. I guess I could have looked. Microphone plugs into the face, and that's excellent, because then you can put that radio in the trunk and just run the faceplate up through and just Velcro it, and then you've got the antenna coming off the faceplate, and that's all people see. And you see the faceplate isn't that big, so. But can you disassemble it? I mean, you can break down the wire, the antenna mount, and all that. And they have, again, if you just type antenna mount, well, they just showed it here, I think. There it is. So this, you drill the hole, you drop this into the hole, and you tighten the nut up in it. You screw the antenna on the widest part, and then on the inside of your trunk, you screw the antenna. And that right there is the absolute best mount that you can come. That is the best one to buy. But again, you got to drill a hole in your you know, in your body to run that through. It seems a little drastic to me. But if you've got an old truck, you could do it to your bumper, a steel bumper or something, man. That right there is the best, because now it truly is part. The antenna is part of the chassis of the vehicle. NEMA, that type in NMO. You see, I said NEMO. NMO is what they call it. It's a permanent mobile mount. I said NEMO. I don't do it. I just know from experience. I've seen people do it, and it's the best that you can buy, but it's just so invasive. You know, you ruin the value of the car. if you like, again, if you got an old truck, I got a 2000 F-150. It's my garbage truck. I'll do it all day to it. I care less. I just really haven't taken the time to mount it in my truck. I will. It's probably a good idea. I just haven't decided what radio I want to put out in the truck. In my car, I've got a 2018 RAV4, brand new. My wife would, she'd drop a golden brick if I drilled holes into the body. So there's no way that's happening. So there you go. If you have a Jeep, there you go. Spare tire carrier, perfect. I bought the Baofeng original programming cable and had a tough time getting communication. Then, like a lot of men do, I read the paper that RTFM, right? Let's see, read the manual. FM. It plagues all men. Plagues all men. So, the genuine Baofeng cable is really good. And the reason why is the chip inside of it. I can't think of the name of the chip. There's a Baofeng doesn't make it, but the chip inside that communicates is a standard chip that has a built-in Windows driver for it. So that's why they always say use the original or use a genuine Baofeng cable. Is if you use the cheap cables, it still works, but it uses what they call a prolific. It's called Prolific Chip, is the name of the company. Windows doesn't have a built-in driver for Prolific. So you have to go and download the driver, and then it has a really hard time finding the same port, and it works. It just requires a little bit more of your attention to keep that connection and to map it correctly between the radio, the cable, chirp, device manager, so on and so forth. Testicle support. So, there was a website and got the correct driver, established comms, and then that's right, repeater book. So we were talking about that, right, Dean? Or repeaterbook.com. Like, it gives you all the offset, it gives you all that. And you, Dean, that is awesome that you figured out what the appropriate columns to put things in were. If you got it right the first time, you're a sharp guy. It took me a few times to do it, program my radio, test. I didn't get it, plugged it back up, moved the values around a little bit. It took me a few times, and then once I figured it out, I got it every time, and now I go in and I can program all day long. I just hate programming radios, especially other people's radios, because when I do, the person they call every time they have a problem, and they don't have a service contract with me. They don't pay me a yearly fee. I don't see why I should be obligated to support your radio for the next 5 years as long as I know you, because I was nice enough to program the radio for your lazy ass. Does that make sense? Not you, but you get it what I'm saying. So I come off as such a jerk doing it. Is what it is. I keep calling. They call me what they want. I'm fine with it. Their radio don't work and mine does. So call me what you want. I can live with it. So you like that RAV4, Dean? We have the same body style. I have to say Toyota radios blow chunks. I just put an Android head unit in it, and I replaced all the speakers. It was that bad. And I had a premium with integrated now. It was Toyota for such stellar reliability in their motors. Their sound system, it's a crime. It's a crime what they call a sound system in Toyota vehicles. So once I replaced all that, man, I tell you what, my Android head unit, it pops now, man. I mean, I get some good pop, good little bit of bass, and get what I want, and it's literally like an Android tablet in the dash. 0.1 measured screen. It's awesome. Dean, Dean and Eddie, y'all know who my wife is, but she'll tell you she could take a picture of it, and Dean, she could take a picture of it and show you it. And it fits a 16. It is, dude. I just have to meet up with you sometime, and you'll see it for your damn self. You'll look at it and you'll be like, holy crap! The vents are integrated into the chassis of literally the vents are part of the radio. It's killer. So, anyways, we've been recording this conversation the whole time because we're still attached or whatever. But yeah, Eddie, you're too far out of range, man. You'd have to fly up here. You're not getting me down. You're not getting down there again. I lived down there. I lived in Pompano Beach for a good number of years. In Davie, I lived. I lived out near Sawgrass Mills, so I'd back there. Anyways, yeah, and it ain't got any better, right? Just not any better. It's just, I mean, you got to pay 4 months in advance to rent a place, and you never know your neighbors because you shake their hand one day, and the next day your neighbor's a different race, and he doesn't speak English, and because the guy you met last week's done moved out, and yeah, too transient for me. So I'm to the point where I just want to live in a van down by the river. I always dreamed of me and the wife getting a nice stagecoach bus, and I was going to Xerox off a copy of my ass and send it to all my kids, and they were never going to see me again. Now I just want a van down by the river. I just don't even care. Just a van down by the river is good enough for me. So, Coconut Creek, oh my gosh. So, I'm going to jump offline here, guys. Any more questions you have about radios, man? I'd love to talk, but we're being recorded right now. And, yeah, I mean, let's, we can set a sidebar sometime. Maybe I ought to set a class or something for some just general S&Gs, anything radio related. Maybe I'll put that on the 9th week or something, and it's not mandatory. If you want to attend it, you can. I think I might do that. Just anything flies, ask any question, because that'll never get published and it'll never get like this one is. So, all right, man. You have a great night. You guys are doing great. And we will talk to you later. Y'all have a good night. Stay safe. God bless. Set up a Zello net. I'm on Zello, by the way. Mercury, just Mercury01, I believe. Let me double check. If you hit me up, hold on here. Mercury-01. Mercury-01 on Zello. You can hit me up on that. All right, guys. We'll talk to you later.